Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the blood-spattered, myth-soaked world of one of the most infamous names to ever ride the rugged veins of the American West. Jesse James. Yeah, that Jesse James. The one who robbed banks in broad daylight, played the press like a fiddle, and ended up with his brains on a floor over a crooked picture frame. You've probably heard the name, maybe caught a movie or two, but tonight we are going to find out what it was really like to live his life. Day by day, gun by gun, choice by absolutely terrible choice. Quick heads up, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and current time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're watching from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's 1847, and you're born in a slave state that's about to become one of the deadliest places to grow up in America. Welcome to Clay County, Missouri, a place where the soil is rich, the tempers are richer, and just about every conversation ends with somebody looking for their rifle. Your family's not poor exactly, you've got land, horses, a few enslaved people working the property, but your father dies when you're just 3. He'd gone off to preach and maybe strike gold in California, and instead ended up dead, buried out west, leaving your mother to hold the whole thing together with grit and grit alone. She remarries, a few times actually, and not all those men are what you'd call gentle father figures. Childhood doesn't smell like apple pie and firewood. It smells like sweat, gunpowder, and suspicion. Your older brother Frank, 6 years your senior, is already reading Shakespeare and tinkering with pistols by the time you're trying to figure out how to ride without falling off the saddle. He's your hero, your compass, and eventually your co-conspirator. The two of you grow up during a time when Missouri isn't just a place, it's a battleground. It straddles the Union and the Confederacy like a cracked fence post, and that fence is on fire. By the time you're a teenager, the Civil War breaks out and Missouri turns into something that barely resembles a state anymore. It's neighbor versus neighbor, literal house burnings, raids, revenge killings, all of it personal, all of it cruel. The term border war sounds neat and academic on paper, but for you it means you don't get to have a normal childhood. You get ambushes instead of birthday parties, wanted posters instead of prom. Here's where it gets real. At just 15 you join a guerrilla group. Not an army, no blue coats or grey coats here. This is something different, something darker. You start riding with Quantrill's Raiders, a pro-Confederate bushwhacker group that doesn't follow any rules but their own. These guys don't march in neat lines or salute generals. They ride fast, burn farms and leave no witnesses. War crimes? That term hasn't even been invented yet, and if it had been, you wouldn't care. It's kill or be killed, and nobody's playing fair. One day you're just a scrawny kid with a southern drawl, and the next you're holding a smoking pistol in your hand, a Union sympathizer bleeding out at your feet. You don't feel guilt. Not really. Because every killing has a reason. Every bullet is payment for something that was taken from your people, or at least that's what you tell yourself. The line between soldier and murderer blurs fast in the Missouri backwoods, and let's be honest, you're good at this. You learn to shoot from the saddle, how to ride in silence under a moonless sky, how to disappear into the timber like a ghost. You even get your first taste of the power of reputation. Your name starts getting whispered in campfires, muttered in towns you've never even visited. There's a strange thrill in it. You're still just a teenager, but you're already stepping into something much larger than yourself, a legend in progress. Now, here's the historical fact you probably didn't learn in school. Jesse James wasn't just some rogue cowboy with a grudge. He was a product of a brutal civil war that ripped families, counties, and entire cultures apart. When people say he was a killer, they're right, but they're missing the context. The war raised him. It taught him who to hate, how to survive, and, most importantly, how to make enemies fear you more than they want to chase you. And now, here's a fringe fact. During this era, some guerrilla fighters carried horse pistols so large that they were too heavy to fire one-handed, so they'd ride with both hands on their guns and steer their horses with just their knees. That's how committed you had to be to the art of outlawing. Guns first, horse second, everything else way down the list. But here's where it gets murky. Some historians argue Jesse wasn't as involved in the Civil War bloodbaths as the legend claims. They say he might have joined the fight late, or that his role was more minor until later raids. Others insist he was right there in the thick of it, pistol blazing beside Bloody Bill Anderson, riding under the black flag of no quarter given. The truth we'll never know for sure, but tonight you're Jesse, so for our purposes, you're in deep. The sun is setting over a scorched Missouri field. You've got blood on your boots and mud in your teeth. You're 15, armed, and already have more death behind you than most men twice your age. There's no going back. Not to school, not to Sunday dinners, not to innocence. You've been made by fire, and the world's just given you your first taste of fame. You don't wake up one day and become Jesse James, American outlaw icon. You crawl into that skin slowly, blister by blister, through war, dirt, and decisions that haunt the back of your mind even when you sleep. And by now, sleep doesn't come easy. Not when the sounds of snapping twigs or a rustling bush send your fingers twitching toward your holster. You're barely 16, maybe 17 if you're counting winters, and you've already seen enough horror to last a few lifetimes. But you're not done yet, or even close. You're still riding with the bushwhackers, and now you're officially under the command of William T. Bloody Bill Anderson, a man whose nickname isn't some exaggeration. Bloody Bill is all sharp eyes and red hands. He wears scalps on his saddle horn like merit badges, and he doesn't blink before ordering the execution of unarmed Union soldiers. You ride next to him, Frank on the other side, and though your hands tremble the first time you slit a throat or shoot a retreating man in the back, you get over it faster than you'd like to admit. There's something both terrifying and weirdly comforting about following a leader like Bloody Bill. You don't have to think too hard. Just aim, shoot, ride, repeat. The raid on Centralia in 1864 sticks with you. You and the others tear through the small Missouri town like a cyclone, robbing, burning, killing. 24 unarmed Union soldiers are captured from a train, stripped, and executed, shot in the head one by one. Some say you were there. Others argue you were recovering from a chest wound that had nearly killed you weeks earlier. Shot while trying to surrender in your own front yard. Historians still argue about whether you pulled a trigger at Centralia or just heard about it from the saddle. Either way, the raid becomes legend. The name Jesse James starts echoing louder through camps and parlours alike. And here's the thing. While the war is technically about slavery and states' rights, none of that matters much to you anymore. What matters is revenge. Your home was raided. Your stepfather was tortured and hanged from a tree. He lived barely. Union soldiers dragged your mother out into the dirt and set the barn on fire. Those are the things that etch rage into your bones. You're not just fighting a war, you're settling a blood debt. Still, it's not all gunpowder and vengeance. There are slow days too, campfire mornings with coffee boiled thick as tar, nights listening to the creak of leather saddles and the low grunt of horses shifting in the dark. You learn to sleep light and eat fast. You learn which trees offer the best cover, and how to track soldiers without being seen. You've officially become a guerrilla. Not quite soldier, not quite outlaw, but something in between. A shape that slips through definitions like smoke. Quirky historical twist incoming. Some guerrilla fighters during this time sewed coins into the lining of their coats to serve as makeshift body armour. You never know when a mini A-ball might find your chest, and sometimes 5 cents worth of silver is the difference between breathing and bleeding. Whether you try that or not, that's up to you, but you do start thinking about your own mortality a lot more often. As the war winds down, you're left with a terrible realisation. Peace is no longer home. War has carved out a space inside you that won't fill back in. The South loses, the Confederacy collapses, and now you're a teenage veteran of a cause that didn't just fail. It got shattered. There's a price on your head. You're labelled a traitor, a killer, a war criminal, and you're not even old enough to vote. So what do? You don't surrender. You regroup. Frank's still by your side, and he's thinking what you're thinking. If you can't win the war, maybe you can keep living like it never ended. You've still got a gun, a horse, and a taste for fast rides and faster exits. You and Frank lay low for a while, licking your wounds, letting the Union patrols settle down. But your bitterness doesn't. It simmers. And when you're not sharpening knives or cleaning your revolver, you're imagining a new kind of war, one with banks instead of battlegrounds. At this point, the name Jesse James starts to mean something different. You're not just a guerrilla. You're becoming an idea. A whisper in saloons. A warning on the lips of every bank teller. You don't know it yet, but you're on your way to being the West's most wanted man, and most unlikely folk hero. Now here's an open debate for you. Was Jesse James a political terrorist or just an angry teenager who didn't know how to stop fighting? Some historians argue you genuinely saw yourself as continuing the war by other means, targeting Union-sympathetic banks and railroad barons. Others think that's nonsense, that you were just a bitter ex-soldier with a chip on your shoulder and a flair for dramatic violence. Either way, you're not just surviving anymore. You're making choices. You're building a reputation. You're feeding a legend. And as the dust settles on the battlefield, your future starts to take shape, not with treaties or speeches, but with cold steel and hot lead. You ride out one morning just before sunrise, mist rising from the fields, your horse's breath fogging in the cold. You're no longer just a boy with a gun. You're Jesse James, born of war, baptized in blood, and ready to write your own chapter in the chaos that follows the fall of empires. You don't trust the law, you don't believe in peace. What you believe in is action, speed, surprise, justice maybe, but only your version of it. And somewhere, out there in the miles of wild country still untamed, the next chapter is waiting. It smells like sweat and gunpowder. It sounds like galloping hooves and shouted warnings. You don't know what the next job will be, but it's coming. You can feel it. The war made you. The peace is going to shape you. And the world, it's about to learn your name. You're not riding under a flag anymore. No more commanders barking orders. No more uniforms or rebel songs sung by the fire. But that doesn't mean you've stopped fighting. You've just changed your battlefield. And it turns out the post-war landscape is fertile ground for someone like you. Someone who knows how to ride fast, shoot straight, and disappear before the dust settles. You're Jesse James, a Confederate guerrilla turned full-time outlaw. The year is 1806. You're barely out of your teens, and you've already killed more men than you can count. The Civil War is over, at least on paper, but in your bones it's still raging. And now, with Reconstruction rolling across the South like a cold front, and carpetbaggers planting new rules in old soil, you and your brother Frank find yourselves in familiar territory, angry, armed, and ready for trouble. So when a group of ex-Confederates comes to you with an idea, something that smells like justice and sounds like revenge, you're all ears. It's a bank in Liberty, Missouri. Symbolic target, lots of Union money sitting pretty behind those brick walls. The perfect place to send a message. This is your first major heist. You don't walk in wearing a bandana or a black hat. No, that's Hollywood nonsense. You and your crew, dressed like townsfolk, saunter in during broad daylight. March right up to the counter and pull pistols faster than a man can blink. Nobody expects it. This isn't the Old West yet. This is still the fragile, rebuilding post-war South. People haven't adjusted to the idea that banks can be hit like stagecoaches. But you're about to introduce them to a whole new reality. The heist goes off. Mostly. You walk out with somewhere near $60,000, an obscene amount for the time. It's a triumph. A victory lap. Except for one thing. A bystander, a teenage boy, gets shot in the back as you ride away. Nobody knows who pulled the trigger. Maybe it was you, maybe it wasn't. Either way, the press eats it up. And suddenly, Jesse James is more than just a name whispered by veterans at bars. You're a killer again, in peacetime now, and everyone wants to know who you are. Here's a historical twist. The Liberty robbery is considered the first successful daylight bank robbery in US history, at least by most accounts. Before this, robbing a bank meant sneaking in at night or cracking a safe after hours. But you flipped the script, made it a show, walked in like you owned the place, made off like ghosts, and now daylight bank robberies become a thing because of you. But here's the catch. Nobody knows for sure it was Jesse James. Not yet. You're still just a shadow, a rumour, a young man with a fast horse and a grudge the size of Missouri. There's no mugshot, no fingerprints, just witness descriptions and whispers. And you like it that way. You're not ready to be famous. Not yet. Not until you have the myth just right. Over the next year, you keep a low profile, sort of. You and Frank hole up in farmhouses, sleep in barns, work odd jobs under fake names. But your hands are twitching. You need action. You're not built for quiet. And when the next opportunity comes, you take it. Another bank, another clean score, no arrests, just smoke and hoofbeats. This is where your legend starts to take shape. Not from the crimes alone, but from the pattern. You're never caught. You never stick around long enough to answer questions. And when people ask why you're doing it, your supporters start answering for you. He's robbing the banks that stole from the South. He's getting back at the Yankees. He only targets the rich. You say nothing. You let the stories do the work. Meanwhile, the newspapers start catching on. One editor in particular, a man named John Newman Edwards, becomes your unofficial biographer, fanboy, and spin doctor all in one. He's ex-Confederate and just like you, and he sees in your crimes something bigger, a continuation of the Southern cause. He paints you as a dashing avenger, striking down the evil corporations and cruel northern elites. You rob a bank, and he turns it into poetry. But here's the fringe fact. Edwards once published a glowing editorial that praised your chivalry during a robbery, claiming you handed a woman back her purse after realising she had no money. Did it actually happen? Probably not, but facts don't matter when you're writing a legend. You're not just Jesse James now, you're Jesse James, the Missouri Robin Hood. And that title, it sticks. Of course, behind the scenes, things are less glamorous. You're constantly on the move, your clothes reek of horse sweat and road dust. Every knock at the door makes your hand twitch toward your pistol. There's no such thing as rest, no such thing as safety. You eat when you can, sleep when you're not too wired with adrenaline, and trust very few people, maybe just Frank, and even then, only when he's not looking sideways at you. Still, there's something intoxicating about it. The thrill, the power. When you ride into town, people look twice. When you speak, they listen. You've become something rare. A young man in a broken country who refuses to obey. You don't follow laws, you don't bow to banks. You ride where you want, take what you want, and vanish into the hills like a ghost. But here's the scholarly debate. Were you really in control of your narrative? Or was John Newman Edwards pulling the strings? Some argue he used you as a tool, a symbol for a South that had lost everything and needed a new kind of hero. Others believe you were the one playing him, feeding him just enough truth to keep the myth going. Maybe both are true, maybe neither, but the myth only grows. By the end of this year, you've done more than survive. You've set a blueprint. Jesse James isn't just a man anymore, he's a movement, an idea, a wanted poster and a whispered story. And even though you're just barely in your 20s, you've already burned your past behind you and built a future out of bullets, lies, and dust-covered fame. Your war may be over, but your crusade has only just begun. You've survived a war, stolen thousands in broad daylight, and somehow managed to slip away every single time. Not bad for a kid from Clay County, but you know what? You're still not famous, not the way you want to be. Not yet. People talk, sure. Your name comes up in saloons and backrooms, in rumours whispered between coughs. But it's still a guessing game. Was that Jesse James? You think he was in on that heist? The newspapers are catching on, and John Newman Edwards is out here practically writing odes to you, but the public doesn't really know you. Not until you decide to show them. So what do? You pick up a pen. That's right. You, Jesse James, outlaw, train robber, certified horse sweat enthusiast, and you write a letter. And not just any letter. You write directly to the editor of the Kansas City Times after a failed robbery attempt. Your tone, defensive, dramatic, and just the right amount of wounded pride. You sign your name at the bottom like you're announcing yourself to the world, and boom, now everyone knows exactly who you are. It's a weird move, really. You don't have to tell the world you're Jesse James. You could keep fading into the shadows, robbing quietly, vanishing into the brush. But that's not you. You want the story out there. You want people to understand that you're not just some two-bit thief. You're a man with a cause, a man with a message, a man who, sure, occasionally sticks a revolver in someone's ribs, but only for the greater good. And that's where things start to shift. You become more than a criminal. You become a celebrity, one of the first, really. You're not just robbing banks. You're shaping public perception. There are people who start to root for you. Not just sympathise with your Confederate roots, but actually cheer you on. And yeah, that gets complicated fast. Let's pause for a fringe fact. Jesse James is believed to be one of the first criminals in American history to use the press as a personal platform. Long before Twitter, beefs and viral confessions, you were out here sending in letters to newspapers, signing them, respectfully Jesse James, and offering your version of events like you were trying to set the record straight on a bad Yelp review. But this fame you're building, it's a double-edged Bowie knife. On one hand, it protects you. There are places in Missouri and Kentucky where you can ride into town and get treated like royalty. People offer you meals, places to sleep, even money. You've got fans. On the other hand, the more people who know your name, the more lawmen want to add it to their trophy wall. And you've got more than a few enemies already lining up. One of the big ones? The Pinkerton National Detective Agency. These guys aren't your run-of-the-mill sheriff's deputies. They're private, they're persistent, and they're way too well-funded for your comfort. Founded by Alan Pinkerton, these detectives are hired by banks, railroad companies, and anyone else tired of losing money to guys like you. And they take their work personally. At first, it is just surveillance. Pinkerton agents asking questions around town, trying to map your network. Then they start trailing you, following your family, knocking on doors with fake names and too many questions. You hear about them sniffing around Liberty and Kearney, trying to lean on folks who might have seen too much. and it gets under your skin, not just because they're close, but because they're prying into your life, your mother's house, your home. Now here's the historical fact that still sends chills. The Pinkertons were one of the first agencies to use modern investigation techniques like undercover work, surveillance, and even early forms of forensics. These weren't clumsy local marshals. These were professionals, and they didn't like being made fools of by some cocky ex-Confederate with a revolver and a flair for showmanship. The real tipping point comes in 1874 when you're involved in a robbery that kills a man named Major John Sheets. You write another letter to the newspaper trying to deny responsibility for the killing. Classic you, but the damage is done. You're officially wanted for murder with a $10,000 bounty dangling over your head like a noose. You can't ride anywhere without someone eyeing you like a payday. 10 grand is life-changing money. Enough to turn a cousin or neighbour into a backstabber. And that makes every handshake feel like a trap. Here's the scholarly debate that still stirs things up. Was Jesse James using the press to control his image, or was he just feeding his ego? Some scholars say you were a master manipulator, using Edwards, and then others, to blur the line between villain and hero. Others believe you honestly saw yourself as a misunderstood rebel, more Robin Hood than Al Capone. The truth, of course, is probably both. You liked the attention, you liked the myth, and somewhere deep down you probably did believe you were fighting for something more than money. But you're also living under a crushing weight now. Fame is a cage. You can't ride into town without eyes on you. You can't trust the strangers buying you drinks. And you definitely can't stay in one place too long. You become restless, paranoid. Frank feels it too. He's quieter these days, less thrilled about the lifestyle. You catch him staring off sometimes, maybe dreaming of a normal life. A porch, a dog, something simple. You can't picture it. The gang's starting to grow. You're pulling in new blood, Cole Younger, Jim Reed, Clell Miller, all men with hard eyes and soft morals. Together, you're making a name for yourselves across Missouri and Kansas. More banks, a few stagecoaches, the occasional train, but always with flair, always with style. Still, the walls are closing in. You hear stories about other bushwhackers getting picked off by bounty hunters or ambushed in bed. You start sleeping with one eye open, your gun tucked under your pillow, every creak of the floorboards pulling you back into wakefulness. You know the legend is growing, but so is the list of people who want to put a bullet in your back. And yet, you wouldn't trade it. Not yet. Not for a quiet life. Not for a peace. Because you're Jesse James. And right now, the world still believes in your story. Let's get something straight. You don't see robbing banks as just about the money. Don't get me wrong, the money matters. You're not exactly out here risking your neck for community service hours, but for you, every robbery is a message. A raised middle finger to the North, to the railroads, to the banks that stomped on your home state like it was a nuisance during the war. Missouri's still bleeding, and in your own twisted way, you think you're cauterizing the wound with fire and bullets. By the early 1870s, you've turned crime into ritual. The gang doesn't just ride into town guns blazing. That's rookie behavior. No, you scout, you plan, you pick towns that are small enough to scare but big enough to matter. The ideal place is just civilized enough to be shocked by violence, but not organized enough to fight back. You've mastered the art of calculated chaos. Sometimes you even show up days before the job, pretending to be cattle buyers or railroad inspectors, just to watch the bank's rhythm. Who opens the safe? When? Where's the telegraph office? How fast can the sheriff get here? Every question has a life or death answer. Then, when you know the script by heart, you strike. You and your boys burst in like a thunderclap. Everyone freezes. One of you, maybe even you, shouts that you won't hurt anyone who does what they're told. That's the line. It sounds almost polite. And then you get to work, pistols drawn, eyes scanning everything. You empty the till, crack the safe if there's time, and within minutes you're gone. Just a dust trail and some terrified bank clerks left behind. The strange part? People are entertained. Your crimes make headlines all over the country. The newspapers eat it up. Every robbery, every close call. They call you bold, daring, even noble. It's ridiculous, really. But you don't correct them. You let them tell the story their way while you ride on to the next score. Now here's a quirky historical fact. Some members of your gang, including you at times, are said to have left behind notes at the scenes of your robberies. Not taunts exactly, more like sarcastic thank you cards. Compliments of Jesse James, one said after a robbery. Another time, a witness claimed you tipped your hat to the bank clerk and apologised first for the inconvenience. Whether it's true or not, the idea sticks. People start to believe that even your crimes have manners, but under the charm and flair, there's something darker humming beneath the surface. You're changing. The line between righteous rebel and cold-blooded killer is wearing thin. You start taking bigger risks, hitting more secure targets, and you're growing more paranoid, more angry, more impulsive. You don't talk about it out loud, but sometimes you see shadows that aren't there. You hear your name whispered in places where nobody should know it. Frank notices. He says you're slipping, but he stays. He always stays. The gang's roster shifts like the tide. Some get arrested, others die, a few just vanish. But the core of the James Younger gang holds steady. You and the Younger brothers, Cole, Jim, John and Bob, you're a family of sorts. Dysfunctional, sure, but loyal, for now. You hit a train near Gads Hill, Missouri, and this time it's different. This time you go big, you don't just rob the express car, you rob the passengers. You stop the train in the middle of nowhere, climb aboard, and move down the aisles like it's your own private theatre. You steal wallets, watches, anything of value. But, and here's the kicker, you skip over the poor, you ask what people do for a living. School teacher? You pass her by. Preacher? You tip your hat and move on. Railroad executive? You drain his pockets. It's deliberate. It's strategy. You're building a narrative. Jesse James doesn't rob people. He robs the rich. You're the folk hero, the avenger, the man who steals back what the North stole from the South. And people love that. It doesn't even matter if it's true anymore. Here's your historical moment. That Gads Hill train robbery in 1874 is considered the first train robbery in Missouri. Another first for the resume. You really are inventing a career path as you go. Banks, trains, and eventually stagecoaches. You hit them all. And every time your name spreads wider. By now there are dime novels with your face on the cover. Probably wildly inaccurate, but still. You're in print. You're in the culture. But the cost is catching up with you. After the Gads Hill hit, the Pinkertons get serious. No more just sniffing around, now they're hunting. And they don't care who gets caught in the crossfire. You hear about agents roughing up neighbours, threatening cousins, harassing anyone with a passing connection to the James name, and you're furious, but also terrified. The fear sinks in deepest at night. You lie in some stranger's barn, wrapped in a wool coat, revolver still strapped to your chest. The stars above look like eyes. The wind rustles leaves, and you're convinced it's someone creeping toward you. You haven't slept well in years, and it shows. But what can you do? Quit? Turn yourself in? No, that's not you. You double down. You even start dressing the part. Tailored coats, fancy spurs, a gold pocket watch. You want to look like a gentleman, even if you're one good sneeze away from being recognised in every town south of Chicago. It's not just about style, it's armour. Image is protection, and now that you've built this legend, you have to maintain it. Here's where scholars start debating again. Was Jesse James addicted to fame, or was it simply a tool? Some say you revelled in it, that you needed the adoration like a drug. Others believe it was all calculated, a smokescreen to keep you alive. After all, it's harder to shoot a legend than a man. But legends are also bigger targets. You wouldn't admit it, but the lifestyle is wearing you down. The constant moving, the fake names, the never-ending tension in your shoulders. You're not a kid anymore. You're a man in your late 20s with a bounty on your head, scars across your chest, and enough enemies to fill a ballroom. But you keep riding, because Jesse James doesn't run. He robs, reloads and rides, and right now there's a rumour about a bank up north. New town, new vault, new opportunity. You and the gang are already scouting it out, because the West isn't done with you yet. You've made a reputation out of striking fast and vanishing faster, and so far it's kept you alive. But legends don't last on smoke alone. You need people. A crew. Trusted men who can shoot straight, ride hard, and most importantly keep their mouths shut. That's where the James Younger gang comes in. A rotating cast of ex-bushwhackers, relatives, and a few wild cards with the bad tempers and good aim. You didn't pick them for their manners. You picked them because they understood something most folks didn't. The war isn't over. Not for you, not ever. At its core, the gang is a tangled family affair. You've got Frank, your older brother, your shadow and your second gun. He's the quiet one. Read Shakespeare. Always thinking 2 steps ahead. If you're the fire, he's the fuse, slow burning and dangerous when lit. Then there's Cole Younger, as fierce as they come and loyal to the bone. His brothers, Jim, John and Bob, are along for the ride, bound by blood and grudges, just like you. Every man in your circle has scars, real ones and the kind you can't see. What ties you all together isn't just loyalty, it's history. You all fought under the same black flag during the war. You rode with Quantrill, survived ambushes, raids abroad, and bloodbaths the newspapers wouldn't dare describe. And now, with no more battles to fight, you've found your calling in banks and railroads. Your targets aren't random. They're northern-backed institutions, symbols of power, wealth, and the so-called New Order. You hate them, you all do. So you hit them where it hurts, with dynamite, pistols, and precision. Here's a historical fact. Between 1868 and 1876, the James Younger gang pulled off over a dozen major robberies, often escaping with today's equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Banks, trains, stagecoaches. If it carried money, you considered it fair game. But these weren't smash and grabs. These were clockwork operations, planned with military discipline and pulled off with theatrical flair. Each man had a role. One guarded the door, two emptied the safe, one watched the street. You usually walked in with a calm, cold swagger and asked the teller to open the vault, please and thank you. And God help them if they hesitated. You weren't cruel for sport, but you didn't flinch at drawing blood either. Mercy had its limits. But here's the thing about outlaws. Too many jobs and cracks start to show. Some of the new guys you bring in are unpredictable. They get sloppy. Start drinking too much, talking too loud, flashing too much money. Not everyone's cut out for the kind of life you're living. It takes a certain kind of madness to stay sharp under pressure, to ride through the night with blood on your hands and sleep like nothing happened. And then there's the trust problem. Everyone in the gang is tough, but loyalty, that's slippery. You're always watching, always listening. You know betrayal usually comes from someone who used to call you brother. You've seen it before, so you start keeping things closer to the chest. You stop telling the boys the full plan until the last minute. Frank notices. He says you're getting paranoid. He's not wrong, but you'd rather be paranoid than dead. Here's a fringe fact for you. Jesse James was known to carry 2 pistols, usually Colt 45s, and he practiced with both hands. It wasn't just for show. Ambidextrous shooting could save your life in a standoff. You trained yourself to be calm under pressure, to aim while galloping full speed on horseback. Sometimes you shot from the hip, sometimes from the saddle, but always fast, always first. Despite the growing tension, the gang keeps riding. You hit a bank in Corydon, Iowa, then a train near Otterville. You never stick around long enough to let the dust settle. Your wanted posters are everywhere now, nailed to post offices, taverns, and courthouse walls. $10,000 for Jesse and Frank James. Alive or dead. Preferably dead. And still, you move like smoke. Your horses are fast. Your trails are clever. You use safe houses scattered across Missouri and Kentucky, riding under fake names, changing your appearance just enough to avoid suspicion. Sometimes you shave, sometimes you grow a mustache. Sometimes you walk into a saloon where your own face is on the wall and order a drink like it's just another Tuesday. And half the time, nobody even recognizes you. The Pinkertons keep closing in, but you stay one step ahead. Barely. You start traveling under aliases. Thomas Howard, J.D., the Howard. Mr. Howard becomes your go-to disguise. You start using it so often it practically becomes your second name. A name for when Jesse James needs to disappear into a crowd and not be the legend for a while. Just a man, just a ghost. There's a debate that floats around in dusty history books. Was the James Younger gang a criminal enterprise or a continuation of Confederate resistance? Some scholars argue you used ideology as a shield for greed. Others say you genuinely saw your robberies as acts of rebellion. Railroads were northern tools. Banks were run by Union loyalists. You weren't stealing, you were reclaiming. In your mind, at least. But even in your own camp, not everyone sees it that way. Some of the boys are just in it for the money. Some are scared, some are tired. You see it in their eyes after every job. The tension, the fraying nerves, the way they drink too much and laugh too hard. You feel it too. The weight pressing down, the sense that time is running out. But you won't stop, you can't. Because you've built something, a myth, a reputation, a legacy. And legacies don't retire. They either go out in a blaze of glory or a coward's bullet. For now, though, you're still in control. The gang's still together, you're still riding high. And the next job is going to be the big one. The one people will talk about for years. Northfield, Minnesota. Cold air, cold cash. And maybe, just maybe, a little too far from home. But we'll get there soon enough. If anyone ever tells you Jesse James didn't understand public relations, they've clearly never read a single line you wrote. See, you weren't just robbing banks, you were building a narrative. And by now, that narrative's bigger than your bounty. Every robbery has turned you into a living contradiction. Outlaw and icon, murderer and martyr, southern rebel and national sensation. And you're feeding that fire one carefully chosen word at a time. So here's what you do. After a robbery, or even after a botched one, you pick up a pen. You don't bother with aliases. You write as Jesse James. Your grammar, surprisingly sharp. Your spelling, better than most school teachers. But more than anything, it's the tone that grabs people. Righteous, indignant, almost poetic. You pen letters to the Kansas City Times, laying out your side of the story like you're delivering closing arguments in court. No lawyer, no judge, just you and your words shaping the legend. Your letters usually start calm, polite even. Sir, you write, I wish to correct some false statements made about me. Then you swing. You deny killing innocent men. You say you're not a thief but a persecuted Confederate. You accuse the Pinkertons and the Union of cruelty, of tyranny, of hounding your family like dogs. Sometimes you throw in a little flair, an insult here, but a cutting observation there. And you always sign it the same way. Respectfully, Jesse James. Respectfully, like you just asked to borrow someone's sugar. It's kind of brilliant. People want to believe you. Your fans say you're not like the others, that you're principled, romantic, the last rebel standing. They paint you as Robin Hood, robbing from the corrupt and giving, well, maybe not giving to the poor, but at least not shooting them. Close enough. Let's pause for a fringe fact. At one point, Jesse James had a higher approval rating among southern newspapers than some politicians. I mean, sure, there weren't Gallup polls back then, but editorials gushed about you, songs were written, preachers told tales of your honour, dime novelists turned you into a cowboy superhero, complete with a noble heart and a tragically misunderstood soul. None of it's accurate. But accuracy has never stood a chance against a good story. You don't just tolerate this mythology, you nurture it. And your biggest supporter? John Newman Edwards. He's the editor who turns your exploits into literature. He calls you a modern-day Chevalier, a rebel knight in a land of carpetbaggers and corruption. It's a stretch, but he makes it sound convincing. You give him just enough truth to keep him writing, and he does the rest, turning robbery into resistance, bullets into poetry. And here's a historical fact that proves how effective your PR campaign was. Even after years of theft, murder, and general mayhem, thousands of people attended your funeral when the end finally came. But don't worry, we're not there yet. You've still got plenty of running to do before you hit the floor. Now, while the public is eating up your legend, the law is doing the opposite. The Pinkertons are furious. Alan Pinkerton himself takes your case personally. He's already lost men trying to catch you. Agents have turned up dead, and the newspapers have made you out to be smarter than them. That's a problem. Pinkerton doesn't like being embarrassed. So in late 1874, they up the ante. No more just following leads or slipping bribes to informants. No, they go nuclear. One night, a group of Pinkerton agents rides out to your mother's farm in Kearney, Missouri. You're not there, thank God, but your family is. The agents, allegedly thinking you or Frank might be inside, lob an incendiary device through the window. It explodes. Your stepbrother Archie is killed. He's only 8 years old. Your mother, Zerelda, loses part of her arm. Blood, smoke, screams in the night. Your childhood home becomes a war zone all over again. The message from Pinkerton is clear. There are no more rules. And you go cold. Up to that point you may have had some restraint. A line or two you didn't cross. But after that firebomb, that line is ash. You swear revenge, you swear war. The Pinkertons aren't just hunting you anymore. You're hunting them right back. Every robbery from here on out feels more personal, more pointed. There's no mercy left in you. Only strategy, speed, and a fury you wear like a second skin. And here comes the scholarly debate. Did the Pinkertons go too far? Most agree yes. That firebomb turned public sympathy even further in your favour. Even people who didn't support your robberies were horrified by the attack. But others argue that you were never going to stop it, that drastic measures were the only way to end the bloodshed. Either way, one thing's clear. The violence just escalated. Frank tries to keep you grounded. He always has. But even he's shaken by what happened at the farm. There's something different in his eyes now. Something tired. And you bury the pain in your usual way. Movement. You get the gang back together, make plans, find new banks to hit. The war is personal again. But despite everything, the fame, the letters, the poetry of it all, you're still living like a fugitive. You've got money, sure, but you can't use it. Every town you ride into could be your last. Every man who shakes your hand might be thinking about turning you in. You sleep light, you ride hard, you keep moving, and deep down you know the story can't go on like this forever. But for now, You've got the press in your pocket. You've got Pinkertons on your trail, you've got blood on your hands, fire in your chest, and the whole country watching. Some want you hanged, others want your autograph. And you're still writing letters. You've been a ghost for years, slipping through fences, leaving empty saddles and fuller tills behind. But ghosts have to eat, and they get tired of hiding in haylofts. After the Pinkerton raid on your mother's home, something in you snaps like a splintered rein. It's not just anger anymore. It's a cold, deliberate thing that sits in your chest and draws the map of the next few years. You start to plan with an almost surgical focus. No more reckless spur-of-the-moment jobs, no more leaving children in rooms that explode apart. The game changes. You change with it. Frank sees it first. He watches you from across the table as you clean a pistol, as if you're polishing a relic of someone he used to know. He reads the mood like a weather report and tries to tell you to slow down, go quiet, lay low, let the heat die. You want to sometimes, you really do, but then you remember your mother's screams and the image of her arm ruined by a splintered window, and the thought of patience tastes like betrayal. So you double down. You recruit men who can ride through frost, men who won't tremble when a telegraph operator starts screaming. You choose targets that sting. One night you and your crew stop a train not far from Gad's Hill, but this time the hit feels rehearsed, more like a military operation than a robbery. You're efficient, wires cut, guards disarmed, passengers questioned and then spared if they're poor farmers or school teachers. You take what you need and what you want from the ones who look like they belong to the companies that bankrolled Reconstruction. It's brutal, clinical, and in a way almost polite. That word, polite, follows you like a bad habit. People keep telling versions of the story in which you apologise for the inconvenience. Some of those versions started by your own hand. You wrote the dramatic denial letters that make you sound courteous even in the act of theft. It's theatre, and you like being the lead. Here's a historical fact to keep close to the trail. The Pinkerton raid on your mother's farm in January 1875 resulted in serious injuries to Zerelda, her arm maimed by the shotgun fragments, and the death of a relative in the chaos. An event that turned even more of the local populace against the detectives. That brutality, whether born of incompetence or vengeance, shifted public sympathies. People who once shrugged at bank robberies now publicly condemned the Pinkertons' methods. Sympathy is a strange currency. It sometimes buys you a safe meal, and sometimes a chance to lay low when the law rides through town. But sympathy isn't strategy. Sympathy can't hide the fact that the Pinkertons start to shadow everyone around you. They infiltrate taverns, sit at pews, rent rooms above the general store. They leave calling cards with smug little messages. Some of them are competent investigators, some of them are privateers with more money than patience. Either way, they're relentless. They hire informants, bribe barmaids, and threaten jurors. You change your routes. You burn maps. You grow hairier, older looking on purpose because a stranger never remembers the face of a man he only sees once. Here's a quirky fact that would make your modern PR advisor proud. You cultivate a wardrobe that reads like a costume. Broad-brimmed hats, tailored frock coats, a watch chain that catches the light, and townspeople begin to identify you more by your silhouette than your face. It's an early form of branding. In a world before mass media saturation, a coat and a posture can spark gossip that spreads faster than a telegraph wire. You use that, you use everything. Still, not everyone around you buys the legend. There's a low, nasty chorus in the papers that calls you a murderer, a terrorist, a menace. They print eyewitness accounts that say you laughed while men bled. They reprint official proclamations and wanted posters. The Pinkertons, meanwhile, are using every legal and illegal tool in their kit to get to you. The nation gets louder, more polarised about what you represent. Is Jesse James the noble avenger of Southern honour, or is he a cold-blooded criminal exploiting post-war chaos? The debate eats at the edges of towns from Missouri to Minnesota. And now for the scholarly debate you know historians still argue over at candlelit conferences. Was Jesse James primarily motivated by politics, a continuation of Confederate resistance, or by personal vengeance and profit? Some academics point to your targets, the language in your letters, and your wartime service as evidence of an ideological through line. Others argue that the money trail and the increasingly brazen, sometimes poorly planned heists reveal a man more driven by greed, thrill, or simple inability to settle into peace. Maybe the honest answer sits somewhere between war gave you the habits and the hatred, and live by the sword living matured into a profitable racket with a side of principle. You nod silently at both possibilities. It's easier that way. Back on the road, paranoia becomes a currency of its own. You quit shaving for a time, let your hair hang uncombed, and take to wearing a pair of spectacles you barely need. Nobody recognises you walking into a church that's just a few miles from your old stomping grounds. You listen for whispers, you brush the dust from your hat and memorise the names of anyone who asks too many questions. Trust is something you ration now, like whiskey or warm blankets. Even loyalty has limits. Some of the men you brought in start to look like liabilities. One gets greedy and keeps a bigger cut. Another talks too loud in a bar and mentions a safe combination he shouldn't have. You take measures, stern conversations, then firmer ones. You can't afford chatter. You can't afford romance of any kind. Not with men who would trade your life for a purse full of banknotes. The roster of the gang tightens into a smaller, meaner circle. You end up choosing partners who know how to disappear as well as you do. Then there's Northfield. Somebody mentions a bank up there, big town, bigger vault. Plenty of money. It feels like a dare. Feels like the next chapter in a story you're writing with gunpowder. You sketch the plan in the dirt outside a cheap barn, synchronized watches, 4 entrances, 2 men to hold the street. You listen to the wind and let it tell you whether the night will favour you. It's months away. But the thought of striking so far north away from friendly ground thrills you. It terrifies you too. It's the kind of job that separates legends from last stands. For now, though, you keep riding. You keep writing those polite, furious letters to the press. You keep practicing ambidextrous shooting with 2 pistols at your hip, because when the law coughs, you want to be the first to respond. You keep your family close and your map close air. You build a life out of movement, out of myth, and out of grudges. The country is changing, but so are you, becoming more deliberate, a little colder and harder to kill. You're still Jesse James, only now you're methodical about it. The Pinkertons made a mistake the night they threw that firebomb through your mother's window. They didn't just injure your family. They handed you something you didn't even realise you'd needed. Permission. You'd always believed in retribution, but after that night, vengeance becomes your operating system. It's personal now, carved into the marrow of your bones. No more flirtation with the image of the noble outlaw. That version of you, gone, replaced by something quieter, more calculated, and far more dangerous. Because here's the part nobody likes to admit. Once you've been hunted like an animal, you stop pretending to be a man. You lean into the myth, you become it, and the myth doesn't sleep. You spend the next stretch of your life surrounded by shadows, new safe houses, new identities, new names so often that sometimes even you pause before answering a stranger's question. The core remains, Jesse and Frank, the youngers when they're not nursing bullet wounds, but the outer circle shifts constantly. A man who rides with you 1 month might vanish the next, caught, killed or bought. The gang isn't what it was, not tight, not loyal, but they're good shots and they show they don't flinch and that's enough for now. But the people around you, they're still paying the price. After the attack at the farm, the Pinkertons don't ease up. If anything, they escalate. Anyone even remotely connected to the James or younger families gets watched, hassled, sometimes worse. They drag your cousins out of bed. They knock on church doors during Sunday service. They question little kids and old women. It's not about catching you. It's about pressuring you into making a mistake you don't. Instead, you make them pay. In April 1875, you and the gang hit a train near Otterville, Missouri, taking thousands of dollars from the express car. Smooth, fast, no blood this time. Just terror and speed and a clean getaway. A reminder that despite the hunt, you're still out there, still in control, and afterward, you send another one of your little letters. Same format, same righteous tone, signed as always, respectfully Jesse James. As if that makes the robbery a formal affair, something you could RSVP to. Here's a historical fact. The James Younger gang was so effective during this period that some law enforcement officials flat out refused to pursue you. Not because they lacked authority, but because they knew it was suicide. You'd become more than a man. You were a weather system, sudden, violent, and impossible to pin down. Sheriffs might tack your poster up on a post, but few were brave, or dumb, enough to chase what that poster represented. And the public? Still split. Some say you're just another killer. Some say you're a hero in hiding. Letters pour into newspapers. Some condemning you, others defending you, some even offer to hide you if you're ever passing through. That's the part that gets weird. Strangers open their homes to a man wanted for armed robbery and murder because they like the story. They like you, or at least the version they've now invented. Here's the fringe fact. At least 2 Missouri towns reportedly refused to cooperate with Pinkerton agents, not because they feared you, but because they admired you. One town even circulated a petition to demand the agency stop hunting you, claiming that Mr. James has never robbed one honest citizen of our county. That might not be true, but truth doesn't matter anymore. What matters is who owns the narrative. But here's where things start to twist. Underneath the legend, the cracks are forming. Frank is growing tired. You see it in his posture, in how long he stares into the fire before speaking. He's not complaining, Frank doesn't complain. But he's thinking about things he never used to, like settling down, like not running, like waking up in a bed with a name that isn't borrowed. And you? You get it, you do, but it's not that easy. You can't settle down, not really. You tried once, briefly, married your cousin, Z, had a couple of kids, played the role of husband and father for a few blurry, strange seasons. But even when you were home, your guns were always loaded, your ears always tuned to the sound of hooves on the road. You were never there, not fully. Jesse James can't live a quiet life, not anymore, maybe not ever. Still, you pretend. You use the alias Thomas Howard. You wear plain clothes. You play farmer. You hold your child and wonder what kind of man he'll grow up to be if you make it that far. You even go to church, sit in a pew like a normal man. And the whole time, your heart hammers against your ribs like it's trying to escape. That's the thing about paranoia. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't ease off when you're eating breakfast with your wife or rocking your daughter to sleep. It just coils tighter. Because you know that someone out there wants to be the one to bring Jesse James down. Not just a Pinkerton agent. Anyone. A bounty hunter. A cousin who needs the money. A stranger looking for glory. $10,000 is a big incentive for treason, and so you stay armed. You sleep with your boots on. You keep your escape routes mapped out even from your own home. And when you hear a knock on the door, you don't breathe easy until you see who it is. Here's the open, scholarly debate that still sparks arguments around university coffee tables. Was Jesse James genuinely trying to reform during this period, or was the settled life just another disguise? Some argue that your attempt at domestic life proves you wanted peace, that you were done with the outlaw game and wanted to be a father. Others say it was nothing more than strategic cover, a way to buy time, to plan the next job. To lull people into thinking you'd retired while still plotting the next train to hit. No one agrees, but here's the uncomfortable truth. Maybe you didn't even know, maybe you were hoping life would pick a side for you. For now though, you're back on the move. The rumours about a bank job up north keep swirling, a big one, a vault fat with cash. Far enough from Missouri that lawmen might hesitate, but also far enough that if something goes wrong, there's no one nearby who still sees you as Robin Hood. The gang's eager. You feel the old thrill again, the itch that only disappears once you're galloping away from a smoking vault with saddlebags heavy enough to make the horse groan. But that voice in the back of your mind, the one that sounds an awful lot like Frank, it's whispering that maybe, just maybe, you're pushing your luck. You don't listen. You never really do. You're galloping toward legend, but you don't know it yet. To you, it's just another job, another vault, another moment to prove that Jesse James still calls the shots. But back home, the world's starting to whisper something else. They're telling stories. Songs are being sung about you in dusty parlours and muddy camps. Ballads about Jesse James, the rebel who never surrendered. The outlaw with southern charm and Yankee precision. The man who robbed banks not for greed, but for revenge. You've become something strange. Something larger, a symbol more than a man. You should feel invincible, but instead you feel hunted. Still, the myth is working in your favour. People in towns you've never set foot in think they know you. They swear you gave money to widows or spared schoolteachers during robberies. They've never met you, but they're convinced they'd like you if they did. And maybe they would, at least for the first 10 minutes, before you stuck a pistol in their ribs and told them to lie face down on the floor. Let's get this straight though, the Missouri Robin Hood idea? It's complicated. It's true you spared folks now and then, avoided unnecessary bloodshed when you could, and targeted banks and railroads, the big boys. But the notion that you were riding around handing out coins to beggars? Yeah, no. That's fiction. You kept the money. You spent it on horses, on clothes, on weapons, on bribes. The poor didn't see a cent unless they were holding your saddle. Still, that myth was sticky. And here's the historical fact. By the mid-1870s, some towns actually celebrated your robberies. Not openly, of course. Not with banners or parades, but quietly. with knowing smiles, with cups of coffee offered to strangers who looked suspiciously like they might be Jesse James. And why? Because those towns felt stomped on by the banks, by the railroads, by the government. You were revenge in human form, and that made you useful, but you weren't always the hero, not everywhere. The North, for starters, never bought your act. Up there, you're a terrorist, a Confederate leftover, a ghost who didn't get the memo that the war was over. And it's not like you haven't earned that reputation. You left a trail of dead bodies from Kansas to Kentucky, lawmen, guards, even civilians caught in crossfire. Not everyone gets a clean narrative, and even your supporters, the ones who wear your name like a badge, tend to look the other way when someone starts listing the people you've shot. Here's the fringe fact. Some newspapers began including moral disclaimers alongside articles about your gang. While the public may admire Mr. James's courage, they'd write, we must not forget he is still an outlaw and a danger to civilized society. As if they couldn't resist telling the story, but also couldn't risk being caught rooting for you. That's the power of your legend. Even your enemies are compelled to explain you. And you don't exactly discourage that. You keep sending your letters. You keep shaping the story. Every robbery is followed by another wave of headlines. Another discussion in town halls and barbershops. Did Jesse do it again? Did they say how many men he had with him? They say he tipped his hat to the bank teller before riding off. And here's the kicker. People want to believe it. They were tired of drudgery, of the law always siding with the wealthy. They want someone like you to exist. Someone who breaks the rules with style and makes the rich tremble. You become escapism in a frock coat and spurs, a dusty American daydream. But the deeper you ride into that legend, the more the real world claws at your heels. The Pinkertons are still out there, burning money and bridges trying to find you. They follow cousins, trail your wife, question blacksmiths and bartenders. You're never truly safe, even when you're sipping coffee by your own hearth. And every time you ride out again, you know it might be the last. Not because you'll be caught in some glorious shootout, but because the betrayal will come quietly, from someone you thought you could trust. Frank feels it too. He's watching you like a man who knows the story is turning. He's quiet in the saddle these days, staring out across the plains like he's trying to remember what peace looked like. He doesn't say it, but he's getting tired of the killing, tired of the running. You don't blame him. You're tired too, just not tired enough to stop. There's this moment, late one night, smoke rising from a campfire outside some nameless barn, when one of the new recruits asks you why you keep doing this. He's young, green, and clearly hasn't been shot at enough to have the good sense to keep quiet. You stare at him for a long time, not sure whether to answer or draw your pistol for the insult. But you answer, quietly. Because they started it, you say. He doesn't understand. He nods, but he doesn't get it. He wasn't there when the house burned. He didn't hear your mother scream. He doesn't carry the war in his lungs like you do. That's the difference. You're not playing outlaw. You are the war, still galloping long after the battlefield closed. And that brings us to the scholarly debate that still divides historians. Was Jesse James a product of post-war trauma, or a man who chose violence because it was convenient? Was your crusade real, or just a smokescreen for robbery and revenge? Some say you never moved on from the Confederacy, that every robbery was your rebellion continuing by other means. Others argue you were just a criminal, clever enough to disguise greed as cause. The truth, it doesn't matter anymore. Not to you. You've been living this life too long to separate the story from the storyteller. Back on the road, there's a new name on your list. Northfield, Minnesota. That's the job that could change everything. A real bank, a big vault, a target that would shake the pillars of the financial elite. You'll have to ride farther than ever before, take risks you swore you wouldn't. You'll be out of your element, surrounded by strangers, in a town that doesn't sing your songs or read your editorials. But the reward? More money than you've ever seen. Enough to vanish. For good. The gang's gathering. You feel the weight of it building. Frank isn't smiling. Cole Younger is polishing his weapons like he's expecting a war. You just look at the map, trace the road with your fingertip and feel something tighten in your chest. Northfield could be your crown jewel, or it could be your grave, but Jesse James doesn't back down, not when the legend's still galloping. It starts with the sound of saddle leather creaking and the crackle of dry grass beneath hooves. Just outside the edge of Northfield, Minnesota, you and the gang sit hunched like shadows, faces half lit by a cold dawn. You're watching a town that doesn't know it's about to be in the papers for all the wrong reasons. It's September 7th, 1876. And this is it. The big one. Northfield is a well-off little town, settled and sleepy, with a First National Bank that's rumoured to be holding tens of thousands in cash and gold. Easy pickings, you were told. No one up here knows how to handle men like you. Except they kind of do. You're far from home. Too far, probably. This isn't Missouri. These people aren't your people. They're not reading John Newman Edwards' glowing editorials. They don't know you from Adam. And if they did, they wouldn't care. The folks in Northfield are Norwegian and German immigrants, Yankee farmers and shopkeepers. Hard men with hard faces. They fought in the Union Army, or their brothers did. They didn't grow up listening to the Confederate cause framed as poetry. They believe in laws, not legends. But it's too late to second guess. You're already in position. The gang is here. Frank at your side, the younger brothers is grim-faced. And a few newer hands you still don't trust. 8 of you in total. The plan is simple. 2 men walk into the bank, 3 guard the street, and the rest provide cover and horses. Clean, fast, efficient. You've done it a dozen times. Only this time the townsfolk fight back. At exactly 2 p.m, you ride in like you own the place. That's always been part of the trick, confidence. You act like this is your town, your bank, your moment. Inside the bank, Bob Younger and Clell Miller pull pistols and demand the cashier open the vault. But instead of panicking, the man refuses. Flat out. Says he won't do it. Not even under threat. Not even with a gun pressed to his ribs. Outside it goes worse. The citizens of Northfield don't cower. They don't hide. They grab rifles. They pour into the street and open fire. Civilians, shopkeepers, farmers. They shoot from alleys, from windows, from behind barrels and signs. It's like the town explodes into war. You're on your horse, returning fire, ducking behind your saddle, yelling for the others to retreat, but chaos is already chewing your plan to pieces. One of your men, Clell Miller, goes down fast, shot in the face. Another, Bill Chadwell, takes a bullet in the chest and dies slumped against a hitching post. You're firing wildly now, no longer aiming for gold but for survival. Inside the bank, Bob takes a slug to the elbow. Jim Younger is shot in the shoulder. There's blood everywhere. And the vault? Still locked. The bank manager never gave in. You don't know it in the moment, but you've stumbled into one of the few towns in America where nearly every man owns a gun and knows how to use it. Here's a historical fact. The Northfield raid was a disaster, and it marked the end of the James Younger gang as the world had known it. Of the 8 men who rode into town, only you and Frank escaped untouched. The rest were killed, captured, or wounded so badly they'd never ride again. And all for what? A handful of silver, maybe a few dollars. The vault stayed shut, the civilians won. It's a strange feeling running away. You've never had to before. Not like this. You and Frank vanish into the woods, galloping south like hunted animals. You dump your gear, change clothes, abandon your horses and travel by foot. You wade through creeks, sleep in haystacks, eat cold beans with your fingers. The legend is bleeding out in your boots. For 2 weeks you hide like scared dogs. Frank's quiet, more than usual. You both know what this means. It's over. The gang, the rhythm, the run of invincibility. Northfield shattered all of it. And the worst part, didn't even make you rich. You risked everything and came back with nothing but wounds and regret. Here's a fringe fact that stings. One of the civilians who helped fight you off was a college student armed with a squirrel rifle. That's right. While you were riding in with revolvers and war-hardened men, a teenager with a hunting gun put a bullet in your plans. That's how thin the line is, how fragile the myth becomes when it meets reality. Now, here comes the scholarly debate. Was Northfield a tactical mistake or an act of desperation? Some argue you'd grown too arrogant, believing your own press. Others say you were cornered by pressure, by money running out, by your fame turning toxic, by the law closing in. Maybe both are true. Maybe Northfield was your way of grabbing one last big score before vanishing for good. But instead of a crown jewel, it turned into a funeral procession. You keep moving, deeper into the woods further south, farther from everything. You don't talk much, you're processing the loss, the blood, the way it all came undone. You think about the men who died. Clell, Chadwell. You picture the Youngers, Cole, Jim and Bob lying in some jail cell, riddled with buckshot, their lives ruined for a job that never paid. You don't cry, Jesse James doesn't cry, but something shifts inside you. A new layer hardens. If the world didn't understand your message before, it sure won't now. The war inside you just dug in deeper, and whatever shred of idealism you were still dragging behind you, gone, shot in the dirt streets of Northfield alongside your friends. You and Frank finally make it back to Missouri, exhausted, hunted, starving. You change your name again, Thomas Howard. A name that fits like a coat you've worn too long but can't take off. You swear off big jobs for a while. No more raids, no more gangs, just you, Frank, and silence. But you know yourself, the quiet won't last. Because Jesse James doesn't fade, he reloads. After Northfield, you don't ride into towns like a thunderclap anymore. You slip through them like smoke. You've traded swagger for shadows. The newspapers say the James Younger gang is finished. Dismantled in the chaos of Minnesota, they print obituaries for men who aren't dead yet, write you off as wounded or hiding in a cave somewhere, or maybe already rotting in a shallow grave with your boots stolen. You let them believe it. You need them to, because from this point on, survival isn't about making a name, it's about keeping it hidden. You and Frank split. Not out of anger, not yet. Just necessity. Too many eyes, too many wanted posters. You both know you'll be safer apart. Frank heads east for a while, starts edging toward a quieter life, the kind you both pretended to want. You ride south, circling Missouri like a ghost tethered to its haunt, still going by Thomas Howard, the name you've used so often it almost feels like it belongs to someone real. Your world narrows. No more big jobs, no more gangs, just you, Z, and the children. You move them constantly. Tennessee, Kansas City, back to Nashville, renting small houses in small towns, always with a story prepared for why you're there. You're a farmer, a horse trader, a man who minds his business and tips his hat to the neighbours. You go to church, you buy sugar at the market, you nod to strangers who would wet themselves if they knew who was standing in line behind them. It's not a bad life at first. You chop wood, you help Z hang curtains, you hold your children while they fall asleep, you taste the edges of something that almost feels like peace. But you never stop listening for footsteps. Every knock on the door jolts your spine. Every distant hoofbeat tightens your chest. You don't go to bed without your pistol on the nightstand, and you sleep with one boot on just in case. You trust no one. You make friends slowly and keep them at arm's length, never letting anyone close enough to wonder why you never go by your real name. Here's a historical fact. Jesse James, now Thomas Howard, lived under aliases for nearly 5 years after Northfield, keeping his family on the move, always just ahead of the law. And remarkably, he avoided capture despite one of the most intense manhunts in American history. His face was known across the country, but his behaviour wasn't. He didn't gamble, didn't drink heavily, didn't throw fits in public. He was quiet, polite and cautious. The man who once robbed trains with flair now spent his days counting change at the general store and scanning the horizon from behind lace curtains. But the stillness, it wears on you. You're not wired for domestic life. Not really. You can play the role, but it scratches at you. There's no adrenaline in selling a horse, no poetry in fixing a fence. You try to keep it together for Z and the kids. You do, but there's a storm trapped in your chest, and it's clawing to get out. Money becomes an issue. You burned through most of it during the years of hiding, bribes, transport, food, new clothes every time you had to drop one identity and pick up another. You can't exactly pull out your old robbery stash in front of a landlord without drawing questions, so you take smaller jobs, labour, hauling, trading. But it's not enough, and slowly the hunger returns, not just for cash, for movement, for danger, for the old rhythm. Here's a fringe fact that feels like folklore but isn't. Jesse James, living as Thomas Howard, once sold a horse to a sheriff and even sat on a jury in a civil case, all under his alias. That's how good the mask became. You had built an alternate life so convincingly that even the law shook your hand without a clue. You were walking the razor's edge between exposure and oblivion, and part of you found it exhilarating, and still you start to itch for the old days. Not the gang, not the blood, but the freedom, the way it felt to ride without a name, to live without fear of normalcy. And eventually your resolve begins to rot at the edges. You start watching banks again, judging security. You scan the street when the local train arrives, wondering what's in the express car. You're not planning anything, not yet. But your hands remember the weight of a pistol like an old friend's grip. It feels natural, too natural. Then comes the worst part, the silence from Frank. He's gone quieter than usual and you don't blame him. He has a family too. He wants out, really out. He's tasted the same peace you tried and found it, bearable, maybe even good, but his letters become fewer, shorter. Eventually, they stop altogether. You don't know if he's still alive or just done with you. Either way, you're alone now, and you don't do well alone. This is where historians start to disagree. Was Jesse James truly trying to go straight during this period, or was it just a tactical retreat? Some believe your years in hiding were sincere, that you wanted to reform and raise your children like a normal man. Others argue you were biding your time, waiting until the heat cooled enough to start robbing again. The evidence? Spotty. But what's clear is that by the early 1880s, you're done playing house. You start recruiting again. Not the old gang. They're either dead, rotting in prison, or, like Frank here, running. So you find new blood, younger men, hungrier, easier to manipulate. You don't trust them, not really, but they're useful. You lay out plans for small hits, nothing big at first. You start testing the water, measuring how far your name still echoes in the dark. And it still does, because even after everything, after the failures, the hiding, the long years of dust and quiet, you're still Jesse James. To the world, you're still the outlaw they can't quite forget. And you like that, you need that. Because normal life never fit you. It chafed, it dulled your edges. And now that you've sharpened them again, you're ready. But in the corner of your mind, one thought won't leave you alone. If you keep going, this ends one way. With a stranger's pistol, with your name in bold print, with your legend finished by someone else's hand, you try to ignore it. But you've always known. The thing about slipping back into crime is, it happens gradually, like sinking into cold water 1 inch at a time. At first, it's just little things. You ride out to look at land that doesn't exist. You meet with men who don't give last names. You ask questions about banks, stagecoaches, railroad schedules. Just in case, you tell yourself. You're not committing, just thinking. But we both know that's a lie. Once Jesse James starts thinking, it's only a matter of time before Jesse James starts doing. You're not the same man who used to shoot from the saddle with a smirk and a bullet to spare. You've changed. The years have taken something from you. Speed, maybe. That instinct you once trusted without hesitation, it comes slower. Your hands still move fast, but your mind questions everything. And worst of all, your new gang doesn't know you. They respect you, sure. You're a name out of a dime novel, a ghost that came back. But they don't love you like Frank did. They don't follow you out of loyalty. They follow you because you're Jesse James, and they all have dollar signs in their eyes. These aren't men shaped by war. They're shaped by stories. That's dangerous. You start small. A few stagecoach hits here and there. Nothing flashy. You're careful to avoid the big cities, the big banks. But every time you ride out with these new boys like Wood Height, Dick Liddell, and the Ford brothers, something feels off. It's like sitting down to dinner at your childhood home and realizing all the furniture's been replaced. It looks familiar, but it's not the same. You don't trust them. Not really. Especially the Fords. Bob Ford is young, twitchy, ambitious in a quiet, oily sort of way. He's the kind of man who laughs too hard at your jokes and asks too many questions about your safe house locations. His older brother Charlie is more reserved, but still has that same nervous energy. You can smell it on them. Desperation wrapped in admiration. They like being near you, but they'd also sell you out in a heartbeat if the reward looked good enough. You keep them close anyway. That's how you've always done it. Better to watch the snakes in your bed than pretend they're not in the house at all. Here's a historical fact that turns this whole chapter grim. During this period, Jesse James lived with the Ford brothers. Not in the same house necessarily, but close. He trusted them enough to bring them into his shrinking circle, to plan robberies with them, to eat meals at the same table. This wasn't a gang anymore. It was a powder keg with a lit fuse, and you were sitting right on top of it. But even as the circle closes, you keep pretending life is normal. You move your family into a modest little house in St. Joseph, Missouri. You use your go-to alias, Thomas Howard. You pay rent on time, say polite things to the neighbours, go to church, even play with the kids in the yard. From the outside, it looks like a man trying to go straight. Maybe that's what you want people to think. Maybe that's what you want to think. But at night, you're still drawing maps, still making plans. You've got a new job in mind, another bank, a quiet town, a quick in and out. You run through it in your head over and over, and every time it ends the same. Clean. Perfect. Safe. You know better. You don't sleep well anymore. You wake up at the slightest sound. An owl, a creak in the hallway, a horse shifting in the barn. You sit up in bed with your hand already on your pistol. Z asks what's wrong, and you lie. You say you're just restless. She knows better, but she doesn't press. Not anymore. Here's a fringe fact. Thomas Howard, your fake self, was so convincingly normal that one of your neighbours once tried to set you up with his sister-in-law, unaware that you were a married man with blood on your hands and a bounty on your head. That's how deep the mask went. You weren't just playing the role, you'd practically become it. It was cozy, almost convincing, almost. But never for long. Your kids are getting older now. They look at you with big eyes, full of questions you can't answer. Daddy, why can't we stay in one place? Daddy, why do we have to change our name again? You try to tell them it's for their safety, that it's all part of a great adventure, but they're smart. They know something's wrong, and that cuts deeper than any bullet you ever took. This is where the scholars start whispering again. Some believe you were done, that the last stretch of your life was a genuine attempt to retire. A man trying to outrun the past and raise a family. Others are more cynical. They say you never stopped plotting, that every picnic and church service was just a cover for another heist in the works. The truth, as usual, probably sits somewhere in the middle. You wanted to be done. You just didn't know how. There's a tension building in the air around you. Like the walls of the house are listening. Like the wind knows what's coming. You can feel it in the way the Ford boys whisper when they think you're not around. In how Bob glances at your guns a little too long. In how every knock on the door makes your wife's shoulders stiffen. You're planning another job, but it doesn't feel right. You've pulled off dozens of these, but this one feels different. Like walking into a familiar room and realizing someone's moved all the furniture an inch to the left. Everything looks normal, but nothing feels it. You start wearing your guns in the house again. You stop talking as much. You move like a man who knows the final act is coming and isn't sure if he's the hero or the corpse. And the worst part, you can't tell the difference anymore. You never really unpack. Even in St. Joseph, where the house is nice enough and the neighbours are pleasant and nobody seems to be whispering your name under their breath. You still keep your saddlebags near the door. Your boots never make it to the closet. Z folds your shirts, but you don't put them in drawers. The pistol rests where it always has, on the bedside table never more than a hand's reach away. You've built an entire life here, and yet it still feels like a disguise you could tear off at any moment, because you know how this story ends. Every outlaw does, but there's a kind of fog that settles in during these final years. You're not riding hard like you used to. You spend your days fixing things around the house, tending to your children, making quiet, polite conversation with men who have no idea the man nodding at them in the general store once robbed a train with 6 guns and a death wish. You're not hiding anymore so much as blending, and that takes its own kind of discipline. But you can't fake stillness forever. There's always a piece of you reaching for motion, for heat done, for the pulse that only comes when you're galloping away from a robbery with lawmen chasing you, and the echo of gunfire still in your ears. It's not glory you're chasing anymore. You gave that up somewhere between the 4th fake name and the 15th sunrise spent sleeping in a stranger's barn. No, what you miss is the clarity. That brief, perfect moment when it was just you, your horse and the road, and everything else fell away. Lately, even that part's gone. You spend more time pacing than planning now. The gang is a whisper, not a roar. Just the Ford brothers and a few hangers-on, none of whom could hold a candle to the youngers or your brother. You're older too. 34, but you feel older. Your hands ache when you ride too long. You've got a limp you pretend not to notice. You used to ride 20 miles without stopping. Now you wince when you bend to pick up your daughter. Frank, he's gone quiet. You haven't seen him in a year, maybe 2. You write letters sometimes, but there's never a reply. He was always the cautious one, the planner, the brother with a compass in his soul. You wonder if he's managed to slip the trap, settled somewhere, bought land, stopped looking over his shoulder. You hope so, you really do, because one of you deserves a decent ending. And then there's Z. She never says it, but she's tired. Her eyes are dimmer than they used to be, her smile slower to appear. She watches you with a kind of distant love now, like someone who's mourning you before you've died. She knows who she married. She knew it when she first stood beside you at the altar. But knowing something doesn't make it easier to live with. You can see it in the way she watches the windows, listens to footsteps, holds the children a little tighter at night. She knows it's coming too. Here's a historical fact that's hard to stomach. During the final year of your life, Jesse James, alias Thomas Howard, was so careful, so deeply embedded in suburban routine, that neighbours described you as a good, quiet man who kept to himself and paid his bills. One man even said you'd have made a fine Sunday school teacher if you hadn't been, well, you. But the house you live in is quiet in the wrong way. It creaks more than it should. The floorboards feel too thin under your boots. You find yourself waking at 2 a.m. to check the back door even though you know it's locked. You've started walking with your pistol tucked under your vest even when you're just heading to the feed store. Not out of habit, out of instinct. Because the Fords are still around, Bob and Charlie, always underfoot, always hovering just a second too long when they enter a room. You catch them exchanging looks when they think you're not paying attention. You see how Bob flinches when you raise your voice or slam a cupboard. He's scared of you, but he's also studying you, measuring you. That makes your neck itch. And here's the fringe fact that should have warned you. Bob Ford had already started talking to the governor of Missouri. Thomas Crittenden, slick-haired and ambitious, wanted to clean up the state's image, and you were the biggest stain on it. He knew he couldn't catch you the old way. Too many lawmen had tried and ended up humiliated or dead. So he went another route. Quiet deals, private offers, amnesty in exchange for betrayal. Bob didn't need much convincing. He was young, broke, and already standing in your shadow. All it took was the promise of a reward and a place in history. This is the scholarly debate that hits closest to home. In your final months, did Jesse James know he was walking toward his own end? Some argue you sensed it, felt the trap closing, saw the treachery in every glance. Others think you were just tired, worn out, maybe even ready. Not suicidal, but not fighting the tide anymore. There's evidence in both directions, but none of it really matters, because either way the ending's coming, and you still have a job to do. You've been planning one last robbery. Quiet town, easy vault, just enough to disappear for good this time. Take Z and the kids, ride west, change your name again. You could be a cattleman, a store owner, a nobody. You tell yourself this one's the last. You've told yourself that before, but this time maybe you mean it. You meet with the Fords to finalise the plan. You sit around your kitchen table with a map spread out and your finger tapping a county you barely remember. It should be a simple conversation, but Bob won't meet your eyes. Charlie is pale and sweaty. You feel it like a draft coming through a window that used to be sealed. You lean back in your chair, say nothing, just watch them squirm. You already know. You start watching them the way a man watches his own shadow, always there, always mimicking, but never quite trustworthy. Bob Ford tries to act natural. He plays polite, cracks jokes that don't land, and fusses with his sleeves when your eyes settle on him too long. Charlie's worse. He avoids you entirely, his succulence louder than gunfire. You've ridden with cowards before, but these two feel different. Not scared of the law, scared of you, and in your line of work, a man who fears you more than he respects you is one misstep away from putting a bullet in your back. You don't say anything at first. You test them. Drop small lies into your conversations to see if they repeat. They don't, which somehow makes it worse. Silence can be honest or it can be strategy. You don't trust their silence. One night, while everyone's sleeping, you check their saddlebags. No money, no maps. Just 2 clean clothes and a letter you can't make sense of. You don't take it. You just read it once and slide it back into place. But the next morning, Bob's quieter than usual. He knows. You tighten the circle, move the robbery date backwards, claim you're waiting for better weather. You're not. You just want time. Time to see if Frank will answer your letter. Time to figure out how much the Fords have sold. Time to decide if you're going to kill them before they kill you. But the problem with being Jesse James is that you've built a myth too big to live inside. The man you once were, rebellious, untouchable, impossible to pin down, has become a box, and every time you try to move, the walls close in. You wanted to be a symbol, and now you're trapped by it. Every lawman in the country wants your head. Every reporter wants your last words. And the people who once worshipped you now see your bounty as their ticket to comfort. You're not just Jesse James. You're a lottery prize. Here's a historical fact that chills the spine. By early 1882, Missouri Governor Thomas Crittenden had placed a $10,000 reward on your head. Dead or alive, that kind of money could buy a farm, a future, a clean slate. It was enough to make even your allies start fantasizing about your funeral. The reward wasn't just bait, it was strategy. Crittenden knew you were too smart to be taken by force, so he let your own greed and paranoia do the work. And it was working. The days crawl, the tension is unbearable. You start sleeping lighter, eating less. You walk the house like a ghost, checking the doors and windows every hour. Z pretends not to notice, but she does. You've stopped pretending around her. You sit together at night, her sewing, you cleaning your gun. No words pass between you. But every silence speaks louder than any conversation. And then one morning, a quiet morning, the kind that smells like dust and burnt coffee, you wake up feeling resigned. Not afraid, not angry, just done. It's a strange sensation. You drink your coffee slower, you don't check the windows, you look out at the yard where your children are playing and wonder what kind of father they'll remember. The one who took them to church, or the one who kept a pistol under every floorboard. You decide to give them one last good day. That day you eat breakfast with them. You tell a story that makes your daughter laugh so hard she hiccups. You kiss Z on the cheek when no one's looking. You talk about the weather, the price of fee. Anything but the elephant stomping around in your chest. The Ford brothers are there too, of course. Always nearby. Watching, waiting. You can practically see the shape of the plan forming behind Bob's eyes. That afternoon you walk into the parlour. The sun streaming through the windows, catching the dust in golden shafts. There's a picture hanging on the wall. It's crooked. You've passed it a dozen times and never cared. But today it bothers you. Maybe it's the quiet. Maybe it's the weight in the air. Either way, you step onto a chair to straighten it. You don't hear the gun cock. Or maybe you do, but you don't flinch. You just reach up for the frame, tilt it gently, and then you feel it. A crack of thunder at the back of your head. A white flash. And then... nothing. Bob Ford has just killed Jesse James. That's the fringe fact. You died facing a wall with dust on your boots in the home where your children were playing in the next room. Not in a shootout. Not in a blaze of glory. Not with 6 pistols and a smirk. Just like that. In a house you were trying to make into a home, by the hand of a man you fed and housed. One last betrayal in a life full of them. There's a debate, of course. Always is. Did you know it was coming? Did you let it happen? Some say you turned your back on purpose, that you were tired of running, that you chose that moment. Others say you were caught off guard, lulled into trusting men who were never worth your time. The truth, you took that with you. Bob Ford didn't get what he wanted, not really. Sure, he got the reward eventually, but he didn't get the glory. People didn't cheer. They didn't call him a hero, they called him a coward, a traitor. The dirty little coward who shot Mr. Howard, the song says. And it stuck. The man who killed Jesse James spent the rest of his life being hated by strangers and haunted by guilt. That's what happens when you shoot a legend, and you became something else entirely, a man turned myth. A warning, a bedtime story, a ballad sung too late at night. But for now, in that quiet Missouri house, your story ends with a chair beneath your boots and a picture frame forever crooked. Dead men don't get the final word. That's the bitter part. You spend your whole life shaping your story. Letters to the papers, carefully chosen targets, every robbery a headline, and then, in a single moment, someone else closes the book for you. With a bullet, with a headline you didn't get to edit. With silence. After you drop to the floor, Bob Ford lowers the pistol and just stands there. The room is frozen. Charlie's pale and shaking, already regretting everything. Bob's got blood on his hands and dust in his throat, and the kind of expression a man wears when he realizes fame doesn't feel like he thought it would. He shot Jesse James. The world should be cheering, but instead it feels like the air has been sucked out of the room. Z scrimps. You don't hear it. The children cry. You don't hear them either. The neighbours rush in. Someone rides for the sheriff. By nightfall, the whole town knows what happened. Jesse James is dead, shot in the back of the head while straightening a picture. And not by the law or a bounty hunter or some famous gunslinger, but by Bob Ford, the 20-year-old kid you let into your home, let ride at your side, trusted like kin. And here's the historical fact, as grim as it gets. The Ford brothers turned themselves in the very same day. Walked into the courthouse like they'd just returned from Sunday service, expecting handshakes and a quick pardon. After all, they had a deal with the governor. Kill Jesse James, bring him in and walk away rich and free. But it didn't go the way they planned. The public reaction was complicated. You'd think the law would celebrate, that the politicians would hold a press conference, that the people would breathe a little easier knowing Jesse James wasn't out there robbing banks and trains anymore. But that's not how legends work. See, by the time Bob pulled the trigger, you weren't just a criminal anymore. You were an idea, and ideas don't bleed out so easily. Instead of praise, the Fords were met with disgust. People called them cowards, backshooters, traitors. Sure, Jesse James was an outlaw, but he was our outlaw, some said. He had style, he had principles, sort of. You didn't rob the poor, you didn't beg, you lived by a code, even if it was written in blood and spite. But Bob, he didn't face you like a man. He shot you while your back was turned. That wasn't justice, that was treachery. Here's the fringe fact. The bullet that killed you was later displayed at travelling shows, tucked in a glass case with a little plaque that said, "The bullet that killed Jesse James, same with the revolver, same with your boots." The room you died in was turned into a roadside attraction. People came from miles away just to stare at the blood stain on the floorboards. You became a souvenir, And as for Bob Ford, well, he tried to turn your death into a career. Literally. He toured with a stage play called The Outlaw's End, reenacting your murder on the stage for paying audiences. Every night he'd step onto a fake chair and pretend to shoot an actor in the back of the head, and every night the applause got quieter. Eventually, people stopped clapping altogether. Because here's the thing, no one tells you about killing a legend. It doesn't make you one. Bob got the money eventually, though not as much as he'd hoped. He got his pardon, he got his name in the papers, but he also got spat on, threatened, shunned. He couldn't walk into a saloon without someone calling him out. Charlie didn't last long either. Guilt ate him alive. 2 years after your death, he shot himself. And Bob? He died like most men, forgotten by the ones who hated him and pitied by the few who still remembered. Shot in a saloon in Creede, Colorado by a man who claimed he was avenging you. Whether that's true or not doesn't really matter. By then, the damage was done. The myth had already picked its sides. This is where the scholars step in and start sifting through the aftermath. Some argue your death marked the end of the Wild West itself, a turning point when the romance of the outlaw gave way to the cold machinery of law and order. Others say your death was just another headline in a country too young to know what to do with its own violence. But nearly all agree you didn't just die, you became something. And what you became? That's the real story now. Songs started almost immediately. Ballads passed from saloon to saloon, sung soft and sad over whiskey glasses. Jesse James, he robbed from the rich and he gave to the poor, they sang. A friend to the poor and a foe to the law. And never mind that you kept most of the money. Never mind the blood on your hands. The songs weren't about the facts. They were about the feeling of Jesse James, the outlaw who stood for something, or stood against everything, or maybe just refused to bow. Children started playing Jesse James in the streets, pointing finger guns and ducking behind barrels, imagining they were galloping into danger with dust in their hair and justice in their heart. Your name was carved into tree trunks and etched into bunkhouse walls. You weren't gone, you were echoing. Here's the scholarly debate still playing out in dusty academic journals and late-night history panels. Who was the real Jesse James? Was he a violent criminal wrapped in southern bitterness? Or was he the first modern anti-hero? A man who saw the world as broken and chose to break it a little more just to see if it noticed? Was your legacy built on fire and lead, or on storytelling and timing? The truth, as always, is messier. You were a rebel, a killer, a furrer, a mythmaker, a manipulator, a survivor, a victim, a legend. None of those things cancel the others out. They just stack, one on top of the other, until you become too heavy to carry but too compelling to drop. You might have died in that parlour, blood on the wallpaper and betrayal in the air, but Jesse James, the idea of Jesse James, never stopped moving. You got back on the horse time and again every time someone sang your song or whispered your name with a mix of awe and warning. And somewhere deep down, maybe that's what you wanted all along. Not peace, not redemption, just to be remembered. The funny thing about death, especially your death, is how fast the story splits into versions. It's like a deck of cards thrown into the air, each landing face up with a different face. Jesse James, the cold-blooded killer. Jesse James, the Confederate hero. Jesse James, the tragic figure. Jesse James, who maybe, just maybe, didn't actually die that day in St. Joseph. Yeah, that's a real theory, because of course it is. When a man becomes myth, people stop believing he can die at all. The moment word of your death hits the wire, the country reacts like it's been slapped. Not everyone believes it. How could they? You'd escaped death so many times before, the idea that Bob Ford could end you with one twitch of a finger felt anticlimactic, too ordinary. You were the kind of man people expected to go down in a bullet-riddled blaze, leaping from a train or facing off in some dusty street, not straightening a picture frame in your socks. So the rumours start. First, it's whispers, small-town gossip about how it was all staged, that the man in the coffin wasn't you, just some poor fool unlucky enough to look like you, that Bob Ford was paid to kill a double, while you slipped away under another new name, another new disguise. Some claim you went south to Texas or New Mexico. Others say you crossed the border into Mexico itself. A few swear they saw you years later, older, greyer, still riding hard and laughing like you'd won the longest con in American history. And here's the fringe fact. Decades after your death, more than a dozen men came forward claiming to be Jesse James. Not inspired by you, living, breathing, bullet-dodging Jesse Woodson James. One man named J. Frank Dalton gained particular fame, going so far as to hold public interviews, offering proof of your survival. He even convinced a few people. That's how powerful your myth had become. It didn't just survive your death, it denied it. The authorities weren't amused. They exhumed your body in 1995, using DNA testing to confirm that the man buried under the Jesse James headstone really was you. The science said yes, but by then your immortality didn't depend on bones. It lived in the spaces between facts, in the doubt, in the legend, in the songs. Speaking of songs, the ballads. After your death, you became a favourite of folk musicians, from local pickers to national acts. You weren't just sung about, you were celebrated, mourned, romanticised. Verses about how you robbed from the rich, helped the poor, killed only when he had to. They skipped the messy parts, the actual body count, the civilians caught in the crossfire, the fear you left behind in towns too small to defend themselves. No, the songs needed a cleaner Jesse James, a version who could be mourned without guilt. Here's the historical fact buried in all that poetic noise. Your death sparked one of the first true American celebrity funerals. Thousands came to see your body. People lined up just to look at your face laid out in the parlour where you died. Some even stole bits of your hair, cut buttons off your shirt, souvenirs, proof that they'd stood beside the man who was for a time the most wanted figure in the West. And then came the merchandise. Yes, really. Cabinet cards with your portrait, sketches of the assassination scene, souvenir pamphlets. They sold your name like a brand because that's what you'd become. Not a man, not a story, a product. And not even in death could you control it. The Ford brothers tried to cash in, of course. After the stage play fizzled and public sympathy dried up like spilled whiskey in August, they turned to sideshows. Bob Ford opened a saloon. Charlie drank too much and told too many stories, and eventually the weight of it all cracked them in half. Charlie put a bullet in his chest in 1884. Bob got his own bullet 8 years later. Some said justice caught up to them. Others said guilt did. But you kept living in every dusty ballad and outlaw story that followed. Every time a writer penned a tale about a misunderstood gunman or a rebel with a cause, there you were, lurking in the day of the story, half saint, half ghost. Hollywood came calling too, first in silent films, then talkies, then full-blown westerns. Your name passed through the mouths of generations of actors trying to capture that strange blend of honour and menace, of charm and cold-blooded certainty. Brad Pitt even played you once, played you well if we're being honest. Here's the scholarly debate that still lights a fire under historians like nothing else. How much of your legend did you actually create? Were you a savvy self-promoter, weaponizing the press and your pen to build your myth? Or did the world do it for you, desperate for a story that made the chaos of post-war America feel like it had a hero at its centre? Some point to your letters, your carefully chosen targets, your use of aliases and narrative control as signs of media genius. Others say you were just a charismatic criminal and the press turned you into something else after you were gone. The truth is probably both. You were clever, you understood the value of a good story, but once it left your hands, it became something wilder, bigger, and harder to ride than any horse you ever broke. Even now, your grave is visited daily. People leave flowers, coins, whiskey, notes. Some just stand there quietly, hands in their pockets, trying to reconcile the man with the myth. Maybe they're wondering if you really did all the things they've heard. Maybe they're wondering if you really died at all. And here you are, still in the public imagination, still getting songs and movies and roadside attractions. Your boots are on display in museums. Your gun, too. There's a wax figure of you somewhere in Missouri, forever mid-stride, forever about to say something witty and sharp. And all of that came from one life. One long, dusty ride filled with mistakes and miracles and the kind of choices that don't come with a second chance. You might have died in 1882, but Jesse James? He never stayed buried. Not really. They buried you in Kearney, Missouri, not far from the farm where you grew up, where the Pinkertons lobbed their firebomb, where the war began for you in blood and bitterness. The funeral was packed. People came from miles away, dressed in their Sunday best, just to catch a glimpse of your coffin. Women wept. Men took off their hats. Some claimed they only came out of curiosity, but the way they lingered said something else. They weren't just looking at a corpse, they were looking at the end of an era. You're laid to rest in the family plot, under a simple stone that reads, Jesse W. James, died April 3rd, 1882, aged 4 years, 6 months, 28 days. Murdered by a traitor and coward, whose name is not worthy to appear here. Yeah, that's real, your mother made sure of it. She didn't care if it sounded bitter. She wanted it to. Zerelda James had lost 2 husbands to war and betrayal, lost her home to violence, lost a child to a Pinkerton bomb, and now her son too laid out by a bullet from a man who ate her cooking. You were her boy, and she wanted the world to know exactly how you'd gone down. Here's the historical fact. Your funeral was one of the most attended public events in Missouri that year. Thousands filed past the casket, some just to see for themselves that you were really dead. Others, more quietly, to say goodbye to the Jesse James they thought they knew. The dashing outlaw, the last Confederate, the man who never let the law take him alive. And then there were the others, the ones who were glad. Union veterans, lawmen, bankers, men who'd seen too many of their friends buried because of you. They didn't come to mourn, they came to make sure, to confirm with their own eyes that the nightmare was over, that Jesse James was finally in the ground. But if they thought your death would be the end of it, they didn't know what they were dealing with. The legend only got louder. Songs were already being sung before the dirt settled. The ballad of Jesse James spread like wildfire across the South and Midwest, passed from one town to the next, usually sung by some man with whiskey on his breath and calluses on his hands. The lyrics painted you as a hero, a poor man's avenger, a modern-day Robin Hood. Never mind the details. The banks you robbed, the guards you shot, the civilians caught in your crossfire. Those parts got softened, erased, or twisted into excuses. According to the songs, you never killed unless you had to. You gave to the poor, you were betrayed by a friend. That was the version they wanted. The one that could sleep easy at night. And here's the fringe fact that sounds too theatrical to be true, but absolutely is. For years after your death, your mother charged visitors a fee to visit your grave and even sold pebbles from the site as souvenirs. That's right, Zerelda became your posthumous manager, keeping the story alive 1 dime at a time. She even claimed at one point that the man buried in that grave wasn't you, that you had faked your death and escaped. A little convenient, sure, but it sold a lot of rocks. And what about Bob Ford? Well, the world didn't welcome him the way he thought it would. For a man who shot one of the most famous outlaws in American history, Bob expected to be carried on shoulders, toasted in saloons, immortalized. Instead, he got side eyes, cold stares, and cheap applause. He was labelled a coward before the ink dried on the wanted posters. His name became synonymous with betrayal. You weren't just killed, you were assassinated. The newspapers called it what it was, a back shooting. And of Bob? He leaned into it for a while, reenacting the murder on the stage like it was some kind of twisted bedtime story. But the cheers turned into boos. The crowd turned. They didn't want to watch Jesse James die over and over again. They wanted to believe he'd never die at all. This is where the scholars start circling, like vultures, picking through your memory. They try to sort the man from the myth. They argue over what you really stood for, if anything. Were you a product of war, broken by violence and revenge? Or were you just a criminal smart enough to know how to play an audience? Did you believe in the Confederate cause, or did you just need a flag to wrap your crimes in? And here's the academic debate that refuses to die. Was Jesse James a political actor, a Southern nationalist using robbery as rebellion? Or was that all window dressing, a clever mask for theft and murder? Your letters to the press suggest a man with grievances, but your body count suggests a man with no limits and no remorse. Maybe that's the point. Maybe Jesse James was both, because the truth is, once you became famous, you stopped being entirely real. You turned into a projection screen for a fractured country that couldn't agree on what justice looked like. You were a hero for the South, a villain for the North, a symbol of rebellion for the working man, and a nightmare for the railroad elite. Everyone got the Jesse James they wanted, even if the real one was long gone. Meanwhile, your grave kept getting visitors, still does. The stone changed over time, weathered, cracked, replaced. For a while, they even moved your body to Mount Olivet Cemetery, citing safety concerns. Some feared grave robbers would try to dig you up. Others said it was just about optics. Time to bury the outlaw in a place more fitting. Either way, the original site in Kearney became a historical landmark. Another piece of the myth preserved behind a fence. Here's something strange. There's a photo of your corpse, taken right after your death, that still circulates in books and articles. Grainy, black and white, with you lying stiff and strange like someone caught mid-blink between legend and loss. People study it like it's a clue, like they'll find answers in the angle of your jaw or the stillness of your hands. But all they ever find is more questions, and maybe that's the legacy you left behind. Not answers, not justice, just the possibility of something bigger. A man who refused to be defined. A man who in dying became immortal in the way only the truly complicated ever do. Not a hero, not a villain, just Jesse James. Death, it turns out, is a surprisingly poor way to end a story, especially your story. Because while your body was laid in the ground, your presence refused to stay buried. People couldn't let go. Maybe because they never fully understood you in life. Maybe because you'd woven yourself so tightly into the American imagination that removing you felt like pulling a thread that unraveled everything. Either way, you weren't gone. You were everywhere. First came the sightings. They started just weeks after your funeral. A man matching your description spotted in Kansas, drinking whiskey and playing cards under a false name. Another riding west through Indian Territory. One more working as a ranch hand in Texas, older but unmistakable. Sharp eyes, quick hands, a drawl like a blade in soft cloth. Each time the story ran in the papers, a little more breathless than the last. Was Jesse James still alive? Did he fake his own death? After all, who would expect Jesse James, the great outlaw chameleon, to die in slippers in his own parlour? Here's a historical fact that blurs the line between curiosity and delusion. Over the decades, dozens of men claim to be Jesse James. Not descendants, not related to. Him, alive, kicking, riding. The most famous was J. Frank Dalton, an old man in Lawton, Oklahoma, who in number 48 stepped into the spotlight and claimed you were him. He had the scars, the voice, the stees. He told journalists about the Northfield raid like he'd just returned from it. He even pointed to bullet wounds that matched the records. People wanted to believe, even some historians paused. Maybe, they said, maybe the man who'd mastered disguise, who'd fooled the law for over a decade, had pulled off one last escape. If anyone could vanish into the folds of America and reappear with a smirk and a story, it'd be Jesse James. Of course, the science had its say eventually. In 1995, your supposed remains were exhumed from Mount Olivet Cemetery and tested against living James family DNA. The results? It was you in that box. The man buried in 1882 was the same man who robbed trains in Missouri and shot his way out of too many posses to count. But by then, the legend had already outpaced the truth. Dead or alive, Jesse James was still riding through the American subconscious, like a ghost no one wanted to exorcise. Meanwhile, your facts travelled more than you ever did. Your boots toured the country, displayed in shop windows and fairgrounds. Your guns were bought and sold like relics, some real, many fake. One revolver, supposedly used in a train robbery, turned up in a pawn shop in Illinois, with a note attached. Property of Jesse James. Even your death mask, a plaster cast taken of your face after the assassination, became a prized exhibit, passed from museum to museum, studied like a roadmap to rebellion. Here's a fringe fact. For a while, your original tombstone was stolen so many times that your family eventually had to bolt it in place. Not just because people wanted to look at it, but because they wanted to own it. As if having a piece of your grave meant having a piece of your legend, but the strangest legacy of all, the Jesse James roadshows. That's right, your life was turned into a travelling act, with actors playing the parts of your gang, reenacting robberies, escapes, even your death. In one particularly absurd version, the show ended with a musical number where the entire cast sang a tearful goodbye to you while Bob Ford cowered in shame, real subtle. Still, people packed the tents, they bought the tickets, they clutched their souvenir pamphlets and told each other that Jesse James was misunderstood, that maybe he had a reason for the things he did. And this is where the scholars roll their eyes, pull out their notebooks, and argue like it's a contact sport. Some say the posthumous myth-making turned you into something you never were. A hero, a noble outlaw, a rebel with restraint. They point to the body count, the bank tellers shot in the back, the guards left to bleed out in train cars, and say, this is not someone to idolise. Others argue you were never just a criminal, that the war broke something in you, or maybe built something. That you were a man shaped by blood and betrayal, trying to claw back a piece of your tis in a world that had none for your people. That, for all the violence, you lived by a kind of outlaw code. Don't rob the poor, don't kill without cause, and never ever get caught. But then there's the third camp, the one that fascinates most. They say you weren't the legend or the villain. You were the first true American celebrity, that you understood the press, the power of image, better than any outlaw before or since. You signed your crimes with flair. You sent letters to the newspapers. You controlled your narrative with a precision that politicians envied. You weren't just robbing banks, you were performing, and the country couldn't stop watching. Even now, over a century later, that idea holds weight. You don't just appear in textbooks. You pop up in comic books, movies, cartoons, songs, even video games. There's always another Jesse James reboot. Another chance to reimagine the outlaw who wouldn't stay dead. And here's the academic debate that gets deeper every year. Did Jesse James create American outlaw mythology? Or did American outlaw mythology create Jesse James? Was your rise to infamy the product of one man's charisma and timing? Or did a divided, recovering nation simply need a symbol to rally around? Someone who reflected their rage and uncertainty, their pride and contradictions? Maybe both. Maybe you were the mirror they didn't know they needed. You weren't the best jot. You weren't the richest. But you were the most memorable. You made sure of that. You carved your initials into the mythos of a nation that was still figuring out what it meant to be American. And in doing so, you became a part of its DNA, forever riding between hero and villain, truth and fiction. Even now, if you walk into a small-town bar and mention your name, someone's got a theory. Someone's got an uncle who swears their great-granddaddy knew you. Someone has a line of the song memorized. Someone just watched a documentary. Someone still swears you didn't die that day in Missouri. Someone still wonders, because Jesse James didn't just die, he multiplied. By now, you're more artifact than man, more headline than history. But your name still travels, passed between fingers sticky with popcorn at old-timey western shows, or whispered by dusty guides on tours through creaky museum halls where your boots sit behind glass like holy relics. The people come not to learn what you did, they already think they know, but to be close to the aura. They want the myth, not the man. The man is messy, the myth is simple. The myth looks good on a t-shirt. And your body? Even that hasn't been left alone. When they moved your remains to Mount Olivet Cemetery in '02, it wasn't just about dignity or family preference, it was about spectacle. Your old grave had become a carnival attraction. Tourists were carving names into your tombstone, stealing chunks of earth, pulling blades of grass to press in books. One man tried to take a bone. Your mother had to keep the grave fenced off like a wild animal, just to give you a sliver of peace. And even then, it didn't last. Decades later, in the 90s, they came for you again, this time with science. All in the name of settling the question, was the man in that grave really Jesse James? DNA testing was still relatively new, but a group of forensic anthropologists and historians managed to get approval to dig you up. Yes, really. More than 110 years after your death, they pulled you from the earth to run tests on your teeth, your femur, your mitochondrial DNA, comparing it against living relatives. The result? A 99.7% beast to match. It was you. Game over, right? Not quite. Because here's the fringe fact. Even after the DMA confirmed it, people still didn't believe it. The Jesse James truthers held fast. They claimed the tests were flawed, or that the real Jesse had his own relatives faked to cover the tracks. Some argued that the man buried in Mount Olivet was your cousin, or a stand-in you paid off before faking your own death and disappearing into the desert. There's even the theory that you funded the testing before your death, as part of some elaborate reverse psychology scheme to keep the truth hidden. Which, by the way, you'd have to be about 150 years old when you did it. But that's the thing about myths. They don't care about proof. They care about possibility, and your legend is built on it. So now, pieces of you live in strange places. Your death mask sits under dim museum lighting, face frozen in waxy silence, while kids press their noses against the glass. Your boots have been passed through collectors' hands like cursed artifacts, one in a museum, another allegedly in a private collection in Arkansas, worn down at the heel. One of your revolvers, a .45 caliber, was auctioned off for tens of thousands of dollars, with bidding wars fought between rich men who never fired a gun in their lives. There's even a travelling trunk that supposedly belonged to you, displayed with a note that reads, "Used by Jesse James to escape capture or in 1879. Whether or not that's true doesn't matter. The story sticks better than the facts. Here's your historical fact. In 2007, the Smithsonian Institution considered acquiring several items connected to you. Guns, gloves, letters. Not because they were rare, though they were, but because of what you represented. You, the man, had become part of the national fabric, not just Wild West history, but American identity. You were rebellion, charisma, and chaos in one flawed, complicated package. You were what a country tired of authority but obsessed with control secretly admired. And now your story pops up everywhere. College courses dissect your rise and fall. Writers draw comparisons between you and modern public figures, outlaws in politics, rebels in business. Documentaries run in endless loops on history networks, where grainy reenactments show actors in wide-brimmed hats peering dramatically out windows, pretending to be you just before that final shot. They never get the angle quite right, and in every one of those portrayals, they take a side. Some lean hard into the romantic version, you, the gentleman outlaw, the avenger of the South, the man who only took what he had to. Others push the darker angle, cold-blooded killer, opportunist, thief with a flair for drama. And in between you still ride the line, smirking under that hat, daring anyone to say they really knew you. The scholars can't agree either. They debate everything from your politics to your punctuation. They dissect your letters, looking for deeper meaning. Did Jesse James really believe in the Confederate cause? Or was it just the banner closest to his rage? Was he shaped by trauma, or born for violence? Did he regret what he did, or did he just regret getting caught? And here's the debate that's become something of a ritual. Was Jesse James a symbol or a symptom? A reflection of post-war America's fractured soul, or just another man who got too good at being bad? You've been called everything from a psychopath to a patriot, from a terrorist to a folk hero. The truth is probably somewhere in the Venn diagram of all four. But here's what's never in question. You lasted. You made it into textbooks, films, music, even toys. They name towns after you, stamps, roller coasters. There's a Jesse James bourbon, if you can believe it, sold in gas stations with a black label that promises rebellion in a bottle. There's a Jesse James motorcycle brand too, fast, loud and made to be noticed. Just like you, and every few years someone writes another book claiming they've uncovered the real story finally. A new angle, a forgotten diary, a distant relative with an envelope full of secrets. They promise to tell the truth, but even if they do, it won't stick. Because no one wants just the truth. They want the story. And Jesse James, you are the story. The Ford brothers didn't get the statues. They didn't get street names or roadside attractions. They didn't even get the peace that should have come with closing the book on America's most wanted outlaw. All they got was the shadow of your name hanging over them like a noose they tied themselves. Killing Jesse James wasn't the beginning of their legend. It was the end of yours, and the slow rot of theirs. Charlie went first. Depression, regret, maybe both. 2 years after that bullet left Bob's gun, Charlie sat alone in a room and put one in himself. Some said he couldn't live with what they'd done. Some said he couldn't live with how people saw him. He'd shot Jesse James, sure, but that never made him famous. It just made him disposable. A footnote in someone else's song. And Bob? Well, he tried, opened a saloon, tried to run a business, put his name in lights. Come see the man who killed Jesse James. He even acted in plays, reenacting your death on stage night after night, like he thought if he kept reliving it, maybe the crowd would eventually clap. But they didn't. Or when they did, it was polite, empty. The kind of clapping people do when they're embarrassed for someone. Bob Ford didn't feel like a man who'd pulled off history's boldest ambush. He felt like someone who had kicked down a door after the man inside had already gone to bed. And here's a historical fact that adds insult to that wound. Bob Ford was shot and killed in 1892, just 10 years after he killed you. The man who pulled the trigger was Edward O'Kelly, a drifter with a score to settle, or maybe just someone looking to make a name. He walked into Bob's saloon in Creede, Colorado, carrying a shotgun and said, "Hello, Bob," before firing point blank. 2 barrels, no ceremony, just like you. And when Bob's body hit the floor, the legend came full circle. Some people called it justice, others called it sad. But either way, no one mourned him the way they'd mourned you. There were no ballads for Bob Ford, no gravestone etched with bitter poetry. Just another man who tried to hitch his wagon to yours and found out too late that your legend wasn't made to share. And here's the fringe fact, one that sounds made up but isn't. After Bob Ford's death, people started collecting his belongings the same way they did yours. His shotgun, his hat, even the chair he sat in when he was killed became a morbid attraction. It's like your myth infected him, even in death. A reverse haunting. Jesse James, the outlaw who wouldn't die alone. Meanwhile, your legend kept evolving, not just surviving, adapting. As the decades ticked by, you stopped being a person and became a blank space for the culture to fill. In times of economic struggle, you were the man who stood up to the banks. During periods of government distrust, you were the symbol of rebellion. And when the country got nostalgic for the Old West, your story came galloping back into the spotlight, all spurs and grit and romantic regret. And Hollywood? Oh, Hollywood loved you. They got to you early. Silent films first, flickering portrayals of your life, complete with damsels, duels, and wildly inaccurate hats. Then came the talkies, black and white dramas with square-jawed actors playing you like you were Shakespeare on horseback. By the 50s, you'd been played by enough leading men to form your own outlaw posse. Tyrone Power, Robert Wagner. Even your own son, Jesse James Jr., stepped into the role once, playing his father on screen in a strange twist of legacy and performance. Then came the spaghetti westerns. Grittier, meaner, less focused on facts and more on feeling. Jesse James as icon, Jesse James as archetype, Jesse James as a man too wild for the times he was born into. You became a template for every tortured anti-hero that followed. No one could quite agree on who you were, so they just made you everything. Noble, cruel, tragic, brilliant, stubborn, deadly, and oddly charming. Here's a strange little twist. The song most people know about you, Jesse James, the folk ballad, it didn't come from your friends. It didn't even come from Missouri. It spread from the mountains, the fields, the rail yards, from regular folks who sang it while they worked, passed it down like a warning or a lullaby. That's the strange part of your legacy. You belong to everyone, even the ones you never met. And that leads to the academic debate that just won't go away. What makes someone worthy of a legend? Is it moral courage, impact, tragedy? Because by most accounts, you weren't particularly noble. You robbed, you killed, you ran, but you also represented something slippery, something that refuses to stay pinned down. Was it revenge, resistance, the rage of a South that never healed? Or was it just pure American-style defiance? Maybe all of it, maybe none. What's undeniable is that you endured. Your name got passed around more than most presidents, your face printed on t-shirts and beer labels, your story told in classrooms, in barrooms, at family reunions. People still walk into your death house in St. Joseph, Missouri, where the bloodstain's been scrubbed away but the memory never has. They stand in the parlour. They look up at the spot where the picture hung. They imagine you reaching up to straighten it, not knowing or maybe knowing what was about to happen. They leave in silence. Sometimes they take a photo, sometimes they don't. Because it doesn't matter whether they believe the full truth. What matters is they came. You became a shrine people visit when they're looking for something bigger than themselves. You became a stand-in for rebellion. A symbol for those who think the system is too big, too corrupt, too cold to beat. You became the idea that maybe one man with a gun and a reason could still shake the world. And here's the truth you probably figured out long before that last sunrise. Living forever doesn't mean breathing, it means resonating. Being spoken of in the same breath as myths, sitting at the same table as Paul Bunyan and John Henry and Bonnie and Clyde. You were the outlaw they couldn't hang, because you hung yourself in the American memory first. The modern world doesn't make room for outlaws the way it used to. There are too many cameras now, too many eyes in the sky, too many forms to fill and digital trails to follow. If Jesse James were alive today, he couldn't rob a bank without 30 angles of grainy security footage and a podcast about it within the hour. And yet, your name still floats through this world like smoke. You've outlasted the conditions that made you. You've transcended the dirt and rail and grit of the Wild West and become something stranger, a symbol in a world that doesn't know what to do with symbols anymore. You can feel it when you walk into one of those little roadside museums. You know the type. Faded wooden signs, admission $5, maybe 10. Inside, they've got a pistol behind glass and a pair of boots they swear are yours. Even if the tag has been updated 3 times and the leather looks suspiciously new, there's always a photo of you near the register. Black and white, steely-eyed, hat tilted just so the same photo that's been copied, colorized, meme-ified, slapped on t-shirts and phone cases. You'd probably laugh at the irony. You spent your life trying to disappear, to keep one step ahead of lawmen and bounty hunters. And now, you're unavoidable. Immortal by way of folklore and merchandise. Here's a historical fact that might make you smirk. At least 7 US towns claim some kind of Jesse James connection. Some swear you robbed their bank. Others insist you passed through on your way to something bigger. One town boasts a tree you allegedly tied your horse to. Another has a bar stool said to have touched Jesse James's boot. The claims range from plausible to laughably desperate. But nobody cares about the accuracy. What matters is association. A whiff of legend, a breadcrumb from your story. It sells tickets, and more importantly, it sells identity. Because in a country still tangled in its own contradictions, Jesse James remains a fascinating contradiction himself. You are a southern rebel with northern roots, a church-going father who shot men in the back, a man who spoke of justice while robbing trains at gunpoint. You are devout and violent, loyal and ruthless, charming and cold, and it's exactly that tension, the way you never fully settle into one box, that keeps people coming back. You're the ghost that fits any haunting, which is why your name keeps showing up in places it has no business being. Rap lyrics, motorcycle brands, bars with names like the Outlaw Saloon that feature neon silhouettes of cowboys mid-draw. Video games let players be you, or a version of you. Roaming digital deserts with a long coat and a revolver, speaking in the clipped, righteous tones we've all been taught to expect from outlaws. Even amusement parks have gotten in on it. There's a roller coaster in Missouri called Jesse James's Outlaw Run, all metal and velocity, twisting through fake canyons like it's trying to recreate the adrenaline you used to live off. For a man who lived by the horse, your afterlife has a lot of steel. Here's a fringe fact that straddles creepy and clever. There's a wax museum in Missouri where your wax figure stands beside replicas of your gang caught mid-robbery. You're frozen there with a smirk, revolver drawn, eyes locked on a mannequin sheriff. The visitors walk through slowly, wide-eyed, whispering. Kids tug at their parents' sleeves. Was he a good guy or a bad guy, they ask. And the parents, they usually pause, because it's not an easy question. That's the scholarly debate that still burns like a slow fuse. Historians are split down the middle. Some insist you were nothing but a glorified thug, hiding behind wartime trauma and a convenient cause. Others argue that you were the natural product of a lawless time, a man reacting to betrayal, poverty, and a country that had left its soldiers behind. One side paints you with a bloody brush. The other smooths the edges, offering a picture of Jesse James as a deeply flawed but ultimately principled rebel. But here's the real trick. Both versions need each other. The myth wouldn't work if it were all cruelty, and it wouldn't stick if it were all nobility. What makes you magnetic is the ambiguity, the tension, the fact that we can't quite nail you down. You're a walking contradiction, and America loves its contradictions. So what do we do with you now in this age of algorithms and endless scrolling? Where does Jesse James fit in a world that no longer fears bandits, but fears being forgotten? Turns out you fit just fine, because now, more than ever, people are obsessed with narrative, with image, with crafting a persona bigger than their truth. You were doing that over 100 years ago, curating your own story through letters to the press, picking targets that made headlines, sparing lives when it served your legacy. You were a myth maker long before the internet turned everyone into their own PR team. If anything, you were early. You knew the power of being talked about. You understood that surviving is one thing, but being remembered? That's real victory. And now you're in the same pantheon as Billy the Kid, Bonnie and Clyde, and Butch Cassidy, only you're bigger. Because you laid the blueprint. You were the one who showed them how to turn bullets into ballads, fear into fascination. There's something almost poetic about it. You, the man who dodged posses and Pinkertons, now immortalised by middle schoolers writing reports titled Jesse James, Hero or Villain. You'd probably snort at the simplicity. Life's messier than that. You knew it. You lived it. But still, the question endures. It always comes back to those two words, hero, villain, and somehow always Jesse James. If you could sit in on one of those school presentations now, back of the room, hat pulled low, just listening, you'd hear your story twisted in 50 different directions. Some kid would stand at the front with a trifold board, pointing to a blurry photo of your face printed off the internet, and they'd say something like, Jesse James was a famous outlaw who robbed trains, but he only did it to help people. You'd probably raise an eyebrow at that. Another might say, he was a criminal and murderer who terrorized the West, and you'd raise the other eyebrow. Both wrong, both right. Welcome to the club. The truth is, you've become a kind of Rorschach test. People see what they want to see in you. A rebel, a villain, a patriot, a killer, a father, a monster, a martyr. You're the Wild West's original ink blot, and the interpretations say more about the viewer than the viewed. That's why you still matter. Not because of who you were, exactly, but because of what you represent. You're not just Jesse James anymore. You're what it felt like to live on the edge of lore and legend. And in this age of curated selves and algorithmic identity, your legacy has only grown sharper. You were an outlaw with a personal brand before people knew what branding was. You understood image. You controlled your story. You had a narrative and stuck to it, even when it was killing you. In today's terms, you weren't just riding into towns, you were going viral. Here's a historical fact that says everything about your cultural reach. In the early 20th century, at least a dozen pulp fiction writers were still publishing news stories about you, decades after your death. Some were lost adventures, others complete fabrications. A few even rewrote your ending, claiming you faked your death and fled to South America, or changed your name and became a preacher. They couldn't let you go. Every generation tried to resurrect you, reshape you, rebrand you. You weren't a man anymore. You were a genre. It wasn't just books. There were Jesse James comics, where you shot your way through impossible odds and always managed to outsmart the law. There were dime novels that painted you as a misunderstood hero, wronged by the Union and betrayed by greedy bankers. You were fighting the system before most people even knew what the system was. And here's the fringe fact that practically begs for a raised eyebrow. In 1960, a toy company released a Jesse James action figure, complete with cowboy hat, six-shooter and wanted poster. That's right, you became plastic. You sat on toy store shelves beside astronauts and firemen. In some alternate dimension, there's probably a kid who grew up thinking Jesse James was a superhero. But the legacy doesn't stop at novelty. In places like Clay County, Missouri or Northfield, Minnesota, where the echoes of your raids still bounce around old brick buildings, your name lives on like local weather. They host Jesse James days, parades, reenactments, barbecue cook-offs and stage shootouts. People dress up like you and Frank, like the Pinkertons, like Bob Ford. Tourists eat funnel cake while a reenactor in a fake beard hollers, "Stick 'em up!" at kids who squeal with delight. Would you cringe? Maybe. But more likely you'd just nod. The game was always attention. The spectacle. If they're still saying your name, mispronounced, misunderstood, romanticized, you're still winning. And here's the scholarly debate that never seems to wrap itself up neatly. Did Jesse James ever really exist as the man people believe in now? Or did the myth overtake the man so completely that separating the two is impossible? Was there a line you crossed, or did you erase it yourself, one robbery at a time? You were born into war, raised on grief and gunpowder. Whatever morality you had was forged in chaos and fire. You learned to survive first, ask questions later. You built a world where law was just another enemy uniform, and justice was something you took, not something you waited for. That's not the stuff of tidy legacy. But people need tidy, so they clean you up. They say, he only robbed the rich. Not always true. He gave money to widows. Maybe. He was a kind man to his family. Probably. He spared civilians. Depends. He never hurt women or children. Mostly true. But only because they weren't standing between you and a payday. See, the messy part of your story is also the most human. You weren't a cardboard cutout and you weren't always kind. You were angry, ambitious, calculating. You gave speeches about lost causes, but you also enjoyed the rush. You liked winning. You liked getting away. And deep down, you probably liked the sound of your name in other people's mouths. That's why the betrayal cut so deep. Bob Ford didn't just kill you, he interrupted you. He cut off a story you hadn't finished telling. A man who lives by legend doesn't plan to die in the middle of a sentence. But that's what happened. And maybe that's why people keep adding chapters. Here's something wild. There's a Jesse James Bank Museum in Liberty, Missouri, the site of what's considered the first successful daylight bank robbery in US history. That's your calling card, not just stealing, but showmanship. You weren't hiding behind bandanas in the dark, you were walking in at noon, guns up, message clear. You were telling the world, I exist, I am here, and I'm not asking for permission. And now, over a century later, the story you started is still being retold by writers, actors, professors, musicians, gamers, reenactors, school kids. They all pull pieces of you into their version, adding their own brushstrokes to the portrait. Sometimes it looks like a hero, sometimes it looks like a cautionary tale, but it's always Jesse James. Because even after all this time, you're still not finished. You're still reaching through the past, through the smoke and gunpowder and broken glass, and reminding everyone that history isn't something we remember. Something we create. And Jesse James, you created one hell of a story. There's something strangely comforting about the idea that you could still be out there. Not literally, of course. the body's been tested, the grave confirmed, but symbolically, in the corners of dusty towns, in the lyrics of an outlaw country song, in the glint of a stranger's eye, when the rules don't quite fit. You've become a placeholder for rebellion, for the moment someone decides the world's been unfair too long and draws a line in the dirt with the tip of a boot. They might not name it, but that feeling, that's you. And now your name gets invoked in ways you never could have predicted. It's no longer about robbery or revenge. It's about resistance. You've been quoted in protest speeches. You've shown up on posters next to Che Guevara. Your name's been scrawled in graffiti across boarded-up storefronts like a signature from the other side of time. Even if they don't know your full story, people know what Jesse James stands for. Defiance in the face of power, right or wrong, especially when it's wrong. Here's a historical fact that feels like a metaphor. In 2017, the Jesse James Farm and Museum in Kearney underwent a major renovation. They installed climate-controlled displays, digitised your letters, built educational programs around the Civil War, Reconstruction, and the social fallout that created people like you. The goal wasn't to glorify, but to understand not just what you did, but why. For once, the story wasn't about the shootouts. It was about the context. The war that raised you, the bitterness that fueled you, the country that shaped and betrayed you. That's the version of your legacy that gets debated now in classrooms and seminars. Were you a symptom of post-war trauma? A relic of Confederate rage? A lost boy who never stopped running from the things he saw and did during the war? More psychologists are chiming in these days, drawing parallels between your behaviour and what we now call PTSD. The sleeplessness, the hypervigilance, the violence, followed by eerie calm, modern diagnosis wrapped around an old wound. But then again, maybe you just like the power. That's the fringe fact some historians can't stop circling. Jesse James might have been addicted to control. Not money, not even revenge, but control. Of a room, of a town, of your name in the headlines. You knew how to flip the script. One day you were an outlaw, the next a gentleman correspondent to the Kansas City Times. You wrote about your innocence like you were reviewing a play. You curated your image like a man who knew exactly how far his name could go before the truth caught up. And even after it did, after the betrayal, after the bullet, your legacy only tightened its grip. You didn't fade, you multiplied. Today you're baked into pop culture like seasoning in a cast-iron pan. There are over 50 films with your name in the title. You've been played by actors ranging from brooding heartthrobs to grizzled character men. Each brings their own version, some with a sneer, others with a smile. Brad Pitt's version made you look like a tired god among desperate men, haunted by inevitability. You probably would have appreciated the lighting. And let's not forget the music. You're in everything from Woody Guthrie ballads to heavy metal riffs. Johnny Cash sang about you, so did Bruce Springsteen. Even Bob Dylan dropped your name. That's the funny thing. You weren't a musician, but you've got more songs written about you than most pop stars. You became a soundtrack to rebellion. Here's the scholarly debate that still sparks late-night arguments. Did Jesse James want to be famous? Or did he just want to matter? Was it intentional, all this myth-making? Or did it just happen because your story hit a nerve? Some historians argue you never cared about legacy, only a cape. Others say legacy was the escape, that in a world you couldn't fix, being remembered became the next best thing. But what no one argues is your effect. You changed how this country talks about crime. You blurred the line between outlaw and celebrity, between justice and vengeance. You helped invent the American anti-hero, the man who breaks the rules because the rules were broken first. That mould, it's still in use. From westerns to vigilante thrillers, from comic books to Netflix shows, the Jesse James archetype is alive and well, riding through modern stories with a six-shooter swapped for a smartphone. You'd barely recognise the world now. The trains are gone, the horses replaced with chrome and speed and GPS. Towns aren't afraid of bandits, they're afraid of bad internet connections. But the feeling you represented, it's still there. The quiet anger, the stubborn pride, the sense that if nobody's going to protect you, you'd better do it yourself. That hasn't gone anywhere. And here's a little detail you might find oddly poetic. There are still people named Jesse James being born every year. Sometimes it's a first name, sometimes a middle, sometimes, in true modern fashion, it's all one word, Jesse James. Parents naming their kids after someone who, by all historical measures, should be remembered with caution, not reverence. But maybe that's the point. They're not naming their child after a man. They're naming them after a feeling. And maybe, deep down, that's what your whole life was about. Chasing a feeling, holding onto it for just a little longer each time. Through the war, through the robberies, through the years of hiding and the ache of betrayal. You were never going to win. You probably knew that, but you were going to matter. Even if you had to write your name in gunpowder and blood. Now, decades past your last breath, your name's carved into the spine of American myth. Not because you were perfect, but because you were impossible to ignore. You weren't clean, you weren't safe, but you were real in a way that stories rarely are. Complicated, messy, unapologetic, and still galloping. Even now, across the pages, people can't stop turning. And here we are, nearly 50 years since the last breath left your body, and somehow you're still in the room, still showing up in strange places, like a trick of light at the edge of the frame. 100 different storytellers have tried to bury you again, each in their own way, some with sympathy, others with disgust, but you keep digging your way back out. Because if there's one thing Jesse James knows how to do, it's escape. Even the grave couldn't hold you for long, not in the minds of the people who can't quite stop looking over their shoulder for the outlaw they swear they'd recognise. You've got your own category now. Jesse James type. That's shorthand for anyone who's daring, unpredictable, too smart for their own good. Heists get compared to you. Grifters borrow your name. Criminals with charisma are called modern-day Jesse James by local news anchors who probably couldn't tell Frank from Ford. And yet it lands. The name means something, still, after all this time. Here's a historical fact with a smirk baked into it. The FBI kept files referencing you well into the 20th century. Not because they thought you were still alive, of course, but because every time some outlaw made headlines, especially one who taunted the law or stirred up public sympathy, they'd jot a note. Reminiscent of James. You became a metric, a comparison point, a baseline for infamy with flair. You weren't just famous, you were relevant, and you still are. Go ahead and Google your name now. See what comes up. Museums? Sure, but also conspiracy theories, t-shirts, podcasts, YouTube explainers with dramatic music and thumbnail photos of your face overlaid with red arrows, TikToks breaking down your robberies. Someone somewhere is probably pitching a new TV series right now, where you're played by an actor with perfect stubble and a haunting past. And someone else is arguing in the comments about whether you are a villain or a vigilante. Just another Tuesday. Here's the fringe fact that somehow feels right. There's a Jesse James-themed escape room in Kentucky, where guests have to break out of Jesse's gang hideout before the Pinkertons arrive. That's right. You, the master of hiding, the king of slipping through traps, have now been turned into a trap yourself. A game, a metaphor, the rebel everyone wants to run with, until it's time to pay the price. And what a price you paid. Because when the gun smoke finally cleared and the songwriters had put down their pens, and the scholars their pens too, what was left wasn't just a body in the ground. It was questions, big ones, the kind that rattle more than they soothe. Like, what happens when a country is so divided it starts cheering for the bandits? What do you do when the law feels less like protection and more like punishment? How does a man born into war ever find peace? You never did. Not really. You tried, bought a house, played the part, held your babies close and kissed your wife's forehead like you could build a fence high enough to keep the past out. But it caught up. It always does. And maybe deep down you were already tired. Maybe the last time you straightened that picture frame, you knew Bob Ford's hand was twitching behind you. Maybe you were just ready for the ending you couldn't write yourself. That's one version anyway, and that's the final scholarly debate, still echoing in dusty lecture halls and late-night whiskey chats. Did Jesse James let himself be killed? Was it suicide by betrayal? Did you sense the trap and walk into it anyway, because the chase was over and you were too proud to be cornered like some common criminal? Or did you really believe right up to the last second that no one would dare? We'll never know. But what we do know, what's as true now as it was the day the bullet hit bone, is that Jesse James became bigger than Jesse James. You slipped out of your own skin and into folklore. You gave this country the outlaw it deserved, or maybe the one it needed to see itself clearly. Not clean, not pure, but bold, angry, complicated. A mirror with a crack down the middle. And look, maybe your story doesn't tie up neatly. Maybe it's not a lesson so much as a feeling. A sharp edge against a soft world. A reminder that some men live louder than their lifespan. That some names become echoes before the body goes cold. That sometimes when a man refuses to kneel, the world either makes a legend or digs a hole. You got both. And now, as the last stagecoach of your story disappears into the dusk, with the wind stirring the dust behind it and a final harmonica note hanging in the air, what's left is just this. A name scratched into the walls of 100 towns. A song sung slow on front porches when the stars are just coming out. A flicker of mischief in the eyes of anyone who ever thought about running. And the quiet, undeniable truth that Jesse James, bank robber, killer, father, rebel icon never really wanted forgiveness. He just wanted to be remembered. So now, as the fire dies down and the echoes fade into stillness, you're left lying there, figuratively of course, beneath Missouri dirt, boots off, hat folded neatly by your side, but not really at rest, because how could a man like you ever rest? Even the grave didn't shut you up. Your legend wanders on, whispered in museums and classrooms, reenacted on sunburned fairgrounds, inked into skin, typed into search bars. You're still riding, Jesse. Still galloping, shotgun slung low, just far enough ahead of time to never be caught. Maybe you didn't live a good life, strictly speaking. You lived a big one. You lived the kind of life that cracks sidewalks when it passes and leaves a crooked trail behind. Not a saint, not a devil, something stranger. Something harder to define. You weren't a blueprint, you were a lit match. And maybe that's the lesson, if we're daring to pull one from the ashes. Not that outlaws should be admired, not that violence gets you remembered, but that in a world built to break people, some souls burn bright enough to etch their names in the dark, even if it cost them everything. You didn't ask for forgiveness. You didn't explain yourself much. You just were. And somehow, after all the dust has settled, that's still enough to make people look up when they hear your name. So we'll let the story ride off now, slow and easy like the last train out of town. The rest is silence.